My king.
5, 4, 3, 2.
We've got Andrew Burchwell in the building.
I can't hear anything.
You can't hear anything. Let's see what you got here. Check. Can you hear me now? Can you hear it now? Can you hear
Now I can hear it.
Louder, quieter, what do you need?
A little bit more?
A little bit more. Better?
Yeah,
Check,
that
one,
way
two.
that way when you get excited I can really hear it.
Check when I get excited. You know me.
Never.
Can you hear good right now? You good?
Yeah, I think we're all good.
All right. We got my king, Andrew Burchwell, in the house. He's a legend in my book. There's very few people that I look at in the light that I look at this man. And one of the smartest people I know, geologist, Ohio State. He's been on the show before. And one of the best thinkers and a wonderful man. Happy to have him in my life and happy to have you here today at the table, my king. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me back.
Very welcome. Very welcome. Last time we spoke, I'm going right into it. Last time we spoke, we were talking about kind of like Bitcoin saving local communities. And Bitcoin's ramping up right now. And it seems like the talk of energy consumption, the talk of energy generation, the talk of mining, the talk of the halving coming up. There's a lot of things that we could discuss right now. And I kind of just want to open it up to you. Where you been, what you've been doing. I know it's all Bitcoin related and energy related and gas and oil and all in the same vein kind of usually. What you been up to?
There's a real beautiful way to look at it all, which is that everything could be related to the thing that you care about most, right? So make that Bitcoin and say, sure, everything that I do is related to Bitcoin. I'm lucky in that actually I don't have to talk about Bitcoin all the time.
Right.
What I enjoy is that all of my friends are having babies right now.
Amen, baby.
Amen.
Yes, yes.
That's not quite Bitcoin, but saving communities nonetheless, right?
It's energy generation and creating money.
It's energy in versus energy out. That's right.
Yes.
And somewhere in the middle there, something really beautiful and miraculous happens, right?
Yes.
So enjoying that example and then abstracting it to things that we can do in the day-to-day has really enlivened my experience over the last few years. And so recently, I would say what we've been doing is kind of harnessing or cultivating the culmination of what has been ongoing for some time. And I think everything is really about capturing moments when they arrive, right? Mm-hmm. It isn't always the moment for you to be out in front saying a certain thing,
sure.
Right? There are times in which probably you're doing a disservice to any idea or message or
absolutely
even just a thought you're trying to carve out. People aren't ready to hear it. People aren't ready to talk about it. It does feel like right now we're ready to talk about all of this.
It really does. It seems like we were all building up. We may have been forcing this conversation over the last several years of our lives because we felt ready.
It's tough to be early.
It is tough to be early, but now it feels like you can have a conversation and people the door is open at least, whether wide open, not even just cracked like it seems like it may have been for some time.
And I feel like a lot of what I'm doing right now whether I'm speaking in front of people here in Ohio or if I'm going somewhere else to try to speak to a crowd, which I did recently, the North American Blockchain Summit, which was what the Texas Blockchain Council put on recently. It was sort of the larger, broad, state-based policy meet and greet for people in the industry, people who are really talking about things that are maybe at the cutting edge of, regulatory, legislative, or even just commercial interest. Mm-hmm. Like what I'm trying to keep reminding people of is that it is unprecedented and it is of a magnitude we should not take lightly, that several presidential candidates now have this at the center of their discussion, right? Yes. That's unbelievable to us 5 years ago.
Absolutely.
I think, right?
Begging for it.
Yeah.
Wishing. Anyone would just say the fucking word. Would you please say the word?
It's really important, and we'd love for you to just pay attention to us, Daddy Trump or whoever.
Yeah,
whatever it is.
Was, yeah.
And whether or not people are doing, I've noticed too, being sort of on the inside of certain conversations, that some people will do things because it is advantageous to them to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think we should always recognize that people are incentivized by that which will benefit them. That doesn't always necessarily mean that those people saying those things are believers or that this is something that they value truly.
Sure.
Means to ends can often be in the middle of a lot of this, but I have spent enough time around enough people who are now at the forefront of it, let's just say the political conversation, to recognize that there are some that are directly in the middle of the conversation that do believe this is a transformative potential, that the technology is going to do something to society, to civilization, that if we harness and cohere correctly, could probably be a really great thing. And right now, we're trying to figure out how to prevent all of the downside risks that are real and do occur. We're trying to figure out how do we prevent any system from being corrupted or gamed?
Sure.
It's the nature
Is it
of
even
us to play
possible?
games. I don't know. I don't know. Somebody, would ask a question and it could get to any root of, well, what does quantum computing do to this? And it's like, well, I don't know. I have no idea. You know what I mean? But really, we're so far out there now that these conversations are relevant. And it's so clear that the majority of people who have potential to carve out the path here don't understand this even a little bit.
Yes.
And so that's tricky. And I'll always caveat that to say I know very little myself, truly. And I recognize, from a humble perspective that I'm always trying to learn more so that I don't, in my naivety or inarticulateness, mess things up or do a disservice, right? Super important. But I think those of us that kind of came to this, from a philosophical and technical perspective years ago, know enough now to be so far ahead of most policymakers, most of their staff even, that we have no choice now but to participate in the conversation. Otherwise, the conversation just happens without us, and that's largely what's been happening. So,
And it's a frustrating conversation because as soon as you hear it, you know that they're either missing key points or key indicators in the market that could drastically change things, or they're missing a value that we see that needs to maybe not be exploited, but shared, delivered, whatever it is. It's like almost the need to like, I have to say this now or
That's right.
never.
And it is so precarious that it actually is kind of a now or never, because there are things we could do to prevent this from ever flourishing. Frankly, I think the Bitcoin is inevitable trope misses that, human action necessarily must be part of actually articulating this into the future. And therefore the whole ethos of Bitcoin is this sort of egregore of sorts, this ethereal sort of non-physical network entity acting of its own volition, pulling us through it, or whatever it might be, misses that actually, no, this is just humans building a system on the ground that's hardware and software based, and that it requires all of us actually participating in it. But because we're not having honest conversations about what it is, what it could be, how it is already affecting communities on the ground globally, right? Part of the problem, I think, too, is that, because we're so privileged here, we miss why this might actually be advantageous today, right now, right? You don't miss that if you're in Argentina today. You don't miss that if you're in Lebanon or Ukraine or whatever it might be. So, yeah, it really is just a really pivotal moment. And, to even be a little bit on the inside of that has been so fulfilling to me, just to recognize that there are meaningful works still to do in our lives.
Yes,
right?
amen. Amen.
Why would we not be motivated by doing something really important with our time, right? And I would say certainly to a degree that a lot of people maybe in our generation feel is lacking, right? There's no moonshot projects today. We're not exploring unknown territory, really. It's why I think Elon captivates people with Mars, because it seems exploratory and adventurous, and it gives us something to really envision is out there. There's so much that's here that seems out there to us in terms of possibility or potential that I like. There's so much to build still. Why would we not just spend forever that we have here actually bringing into the world the abundance that is possible? We know it's possible. It's possible for some people right now today.
Absolutely.
Seen it. It's amazing.
Yes.
Heaven on earth.
Yes,
Right?
it is.
How do we bring that to more people?
Yeah.
That's it.
It's interesting you say that. And a friend of mine just shared CRISPR's new tech to cure sickle cell.
Okay.
And there's two different options. One is like $2.3 million and the other is 3.2 or something. Like, really, I think that's it. It's like 2.3 and 3.2 are the two options
Okay.
to not have sickle cell anymore. And what's a life worth? And it affects a lot of lower income people. It's something that's been on my mind a lot lately. Ethereum currently, for those hip to cryptocurrency, it's another blockchain system that has smart contracts on it. A regular transaction for a token swap is between 20 and 45-ish dollars. The global daily median income, repeat, global, for a system like this that is global, is $33 a day. Mm-hmm. That's what most people are bringing in globally per workday. One fucking transaction on this platform would cost them an entire day's work to process.
That's right.
That's not the future.
No.
That's not what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And it can serve a purpose to a select group of people, but that's not for everyone. And if this tech is trickle down, if this tech is trickle up, whatever it is, there are a plethora of solutions and abundance that needs to be shared. And I mean, this goes all the way to, connect to the sickle cell. How many people that are in poor or underdeveloped countries have access to millions of dollars to save their life and potentially their entire family lineage if they're the only son or whatever it is? And it's just a lot to process and think about of like how meaningful every individual is and how much that matters to any person. If it was you and you had sickle cell and you're thinking to yourself, well, I need to come up with fucking $3 million.
I hope I have great friends.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. I mean, it's like a GoFundMe, whatever it is.
What's the price of bonk today?
We're not, I don't know if we're cashing in the bonk. And it's,
I've got a compelling argument. No, I see exactly what you're saying. And that valuation is relative to a unit metric that, I would argue has been corrupted. Mm-hmm. We'll start there and maybe explore it from that lens, because when you distort a price signal, what you get is untruth. And when you get untruth, what you get is falsification broadly. It perpetuates. You're making waves, right? So that over time and at scale, to me, leads to a perverted condition where we even are asking the question of, where do I get $2.5 million for sickle cell? You know what I mean?
Is the market wrong here? Is that what you're getting at? I mean, the market would argue the market's never wrong, but is the market wrong?
The market is accurately priced according to its contextual biases, and those biases are inherent to the system, and I think it makes it such that everything is priced incorrectly to some other metric of resourceful coherence. This is the whole thing, is like, what does it mean to be a dollar, to have a dollar, to use a dollar, right? And so when we could make sense of that through a physical abstraction that we call, backing, right? When gold backed a dollar, we could say, well, I have a physical thing that is tangible from an atomic perspective that I can then value in equal weighted measure relatively, right? Well, we've lost that completely, so we don't actually know what we're relating to anymore, I think. And in the unrelational dynamics of our current monetary system, we're kind of talking nonsense, I think, at scale. Of course, we can make sense of it day to day. Of course, it works. But $2.5 million for a surgery for somebody somewhere in Africa probably doesn't mean the same thing as $2.5 million for somebody in Singapore, right? Mm-hmm. And so, the relative comparison of that jurisdiction's ability to cohere resources probably says on a relative basis, absolutely, the Singaporean deserves more access to this thing, right? But is the question, do we have the resources to do it for everybody who has sickle cell? I don't know. How many people have sickle cell in the world? These are the statistics. Is it 1 million people? You know what I mean? Is it 100 million, right? And then the question is like, well, how do you scale it? And that requires resources. And so then everything at the end of the day comes back to, how does our system of commodity swap and inter-exchange globally make sense at a fundamental level? And I think the bet that's being made right now is that it is complete nonsense, and that the physical things are the most important, and that therefore this is actually more of a relevant question of how many barrels of oil does it take for that sickle cell surgery to get done? And I would say, well, then we're actually talking something that, we can actually trade with meaningfully, I think. And this is the thing, too, where, like, what does a dollar mean when the bond market goes complete, schizophrenic mode, for instance, right? Like it only works until it doesn't. We're talking about these numbers as if they're static. They're not. 20 years from now in a hyperinflationary environment, just look at what happened in Argentina, for instance, 1.5% inflation since 1990.
1.5 million?
1.5 million. Can you even imagine what that means? I don't
No.
know. It's incomprehensible to the mind to think of a relative scale of comparison of
I mean, how do you even get there? Like, it's just absolute corruption, and they're like, this works for us this month? I mean, like, it just seems so short-sighted. How do you
get there is probably a long series of decisions that were made long before when that started, right? But I think at the end of the day, there was probably resource-based economy that got usurped in the middle of post-New Deal, post-World War II era globalist economy. And then all of a sudden, the resources of Argentina were sold out to a certain degree, right? This is the nature of, I think, the cycles of interaction here, is that eventually the resource that you have that you value is going to be superseded by some multinational authority. That could be corporate, that could be government, it could be whatever it is, and basically takes that resource and then puts you under a subservient model of trade exchange that is relative to a price that you don't control. This is what's happening in Africa right now with the French currency that the French don't even use, right? I think we talked about this the last time where, basically if I'm in one of these countries beholden to this hierarchical system, which is basically dominated and controlled by force, right? It's just military power abstracting itself. Then all of a sudden, my oil's not worth the global market for oil. It's worth whatever I'm forced to sell it for under this system of exchange for a token that I can only interact with within this little community pool, right? So it's a complete corruption of it. And then all of that rolls up and unfolds, and then it's fundamentally underlined by this US dollar token that we've basically just completely destroyed any integrity therein. You could say, well, okay, we've created velocity and the market is, easing and things are moving, et cetera, et cetera. Well, yes, right? But a complete debasement of this relative to real things over time is going to catch up with it. So I think, honestly, the big, why do you see Putin and MBS dapping it up like homies right now is because they're extremely energy abundant jurisdictions that know the game moving forward is going to start looking more real in that dimension. And so I don't know. The question starts with sickle cell. I think it ends with until we uncorrupt the price signal, those questions are going to be really difficult. I think if we can get to something that's a little less corrupted, something that's more real, I don't know, my estimation, my theory, what I'm hoping for is that things like that can become more accessible because we're able to utilize our resources more efficiently and not waste all of it in the middle of this, hodgepodge of financial trickery. But
So it seems like you're really good at articulating what your goals are, and you've gotten much better at it over the last 3 years. You've gotten
Thank you.
to where you really know, it feels like you know where you're going, you see it, and you're able to describe it in glorious detail. And I would say today, when you're going in to speak to people, and I know you just went to Texas, you're doing all kinds of mining stuff, you're talking to people about energy production and not wasting offshoots of that energy, whatever it is.
Yeah.
How are you looking at every situation differently to present to them the best way forward for that person? Or is it a pretty straight, this is the path, there is the one path, and I need to get you onto this path? Is it routing them to a certain area, or is it their path that you're kind of describing to them in the best light?
That's a really interesting question, and I appreciate it. It just in the, it starts with a compliment, which I always appreciate from you. And I would say
Meaningful
to return
too.
that,
I love it. I mean, I love what you're doing right now. It's awesome.
I really appreciate that. And I do just want to say that a lot of that ability to articulate is coming from simply just hanging out with people like yourself.
Thanks.
And really talking
I
more
love you
with
too.
people who, bring the best out of me. So thank you there. I love you. But in relation to that question, I think it's actually a really interesting way to abstract kind of the energy conversation that we have, which is that energy is ever present in everything. And so, is there one path for everybody? No, probably not. I think that would be arrogant of me to ever assume, hey, everybody in the world come follow me to do this thing or whatever it might be, or this idea. And I think, people who get a little too narrowly focused will probably miss some of the really interesting things that are happening. So I never want to be somebody that says, this is the way, it is the only way, and if you don't follow me, whatever, you're an enemy, or I'm not going to talk to you or text you back. The thing that I think is really important is that, what made me so able to do this? What excited me about the work and my ability to do the work and to be here doing this now? Looks like something that would be akin to a spiritual revival within my own self. It was an individual coherence of, an abundant potential that I had never felt before. And that led me down a path of being able to articulate the things that I think are worth bringing into the world. And I would never want to deny anybody that either. I think the word is, hey, that's possible for you too, right? This is the whole thing of the parable of, disciples and all of that is, hey, I've discovered this beautiful truth and I have good news, right? It's possible within you too.
It is possible. Yes, it is.
Right?
Yeah.
And it isn't actually much more complicated than that. And so, when you talk about me having a lot of Bitcoin conversations, well, I'm really actually to the point now where I notice that Bitcoin has simply been a means to a lot of other more interesting, more important philosophical tenets, values, et cetera.
Same for me. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It led me to being able to understand myself a little better, which led me to being able to articulate my values into the world a little better. And it just so happens that it intersects with what I think is the most important topic in the world, which is how do we harness and cohere energy, right? And I don't mean oil. I don't, I don't mean wind energy, or I mean the physical coherence and transference of all that is an interplay, a dance that's very elegant, very beautiful, very complicated. And there are ways, it seems, in which we can do that as people, as groups, as tribes, as communities, as societies that have positive output, and there are ways that we can do that that are self-destructive and lead to, societies falling by the wayside. We've seen this numerous times throughout history. It isn't as if it's ever a given that anything lasts, right? Well, what do we value and what do we want to last? And if we value these things so heavily, how do we make it so that we can have them last, right? That's actually a really hard question. And I'm certainly not at the point where I have an answer to it. I've just noticed that's such a valuable question that I'm trying to mature myself enough to be ready and able to handle it truly and fully. And so I think in that way, all I ever try to do is meet anybody where they are and try to understand what they care about and try to listen to them about what they're struggling with in life. And then if I can, I'll relate that to something that I think is maybe a valuable thing to think about, or a way to move forward, maybe that would help them consider things from a different perspective. And really, I think, honestly, the corruption of the price signal that has distorted the value of the currency that we're using to exchange has led to a diminished quality of life, not in aggregate globally, but certainly in pockets where we were unable to prevent those degradations from occurring as a result of the way we were using the currency, right? So in times of abundance, you allow for art and other excesses and things really flourish, but the true, I think, sharp nature of freedom is that it comes with an inherent responsibility. And if you don't handle that responsibility, you suffer, period. I don't think it's any more complicated than that. I've seen that personally in my own life over and over and over again, right? So following that advice and just saying, well, what can we do as people, as individuals, as groups, as tribes, as societies to cease suffering in any dimension, right? Even if it's just a little bit. You know how they're saying, well, inflation's over because the inflation percentage is decreasing, right? Well, that's to not understand velocity versus acceleration, right? There's a difference between a rate of change decreasing and the velocity decreasing, right? And so I think it's just the same thing with energy too. And we've been in a diminishing environment for a long time, I think our whole lives, and probably longer than that, and to degrees that we can't really understand from a physical perspective. But through that process, I think that there are those of us that are looking to affect in space the upliftment of others, the reversal of that, right? How do we cohere energy positively, and how do we lead to more and better energy? And that isn't just wires and, liquids and fuels. That's hearts and minds. That's communities of people, right? So I think they're all one big story. I think we can talk about it through different lenses. I certainly don't go down rabbit holes of trying to talk to people about, the nature of the energetics as we know and refer to them. And, there are reasons why we talk about vibes a lot, but I think that is a lot of what we're talking about here. And really, I just try to stick with what's relevant to the person. And, can we all try to figure out whether or not there's a means of organizing or coordinating that's new? And if there is, which, surprise, I think we think that there is, what can we do with that? Are there interesting implications that we haven't considered before? You will never get there if you don't even think about it in the first place. So step one is think about it.
It's really interesting that you bring up, you basically brought up discipline. Freedom comes with a lot of responsibility. And Evan talked yesterday about how strict discipline allows for freedom. And the last time you and I spoke, I was blown away I'm not kidding you, like 3 or 4 days. All I could think about was the energy conversation we had with fluctuating currents and the current needing to remain the same and not drop below or go too high for electricity going into homes.
Yeah.
And so as you're talking about this and how you got here, how did you get to this place? Like, what was your journey from high school to Ohio State, geologist at Battelle? How did these things align to where now you're looking at all energy sources? When you look back, does it seem like a pretty straight line, or does it seem like you took a couple laps or loops? What was the path of seeing from young Andrew Burchwell to today, looking back? How did you get here to even value this type of thinking and energetic understanding?
So what people won't see in that question is what you did with your hands through the explanation of sort of the spiral, which, spiraling inward, the asymptotic, cyclical trend towards.
We got to get the video going.
Sooner or later. This is me pumping you up in that dimension. But then again, I'm glad I'm not on camera today.
Amen.
Amen. So how did I get here? Well, it came with a lot of suffering. It makes no sense whatsoever. No. I think that I was blessed in many ways. And I definitely have this perspective now that it took me my whole life to come to, which was that I am blessed in so many ways to have been given the perspectives of my childhood. I think in many ways in fourth grade, I was voted most average, and I've always thought about that as an interesting joke.
It is interesting.
To James Bell. I just like to bring that up.
James Bell's not the teacher?
Yeah, no, it was one of the students who was giving out things. It still makes me laugh, and I can't wait to bring it up with him again. But I was always looking at that language and thinking, that's not great. Most average. Who wants to be average? Actually, what I think it was more of a recognition.
How incredible that I said keeping the rate current and most average is really like what you're focused on right now.
Wave focused, sinusoidal. Yeah, it's beautiful. It really is always beautiful to me when you articulate some of these things that occur over time that you don't see in the moments, right? I was always really interested in, how physical things translate into non-physical things, right? So that's why you and I relate. I'm interested in your ability to cohere acoustic waves, right? Mm-hmm. That's like a really beautiful skill. For most of my life, that articulated as vibes. If I think I have something that is innate that I didn't train, it was just an inherent ability to understand a room. My challenge in life was always, what do I do with that? You know what I mean? So I have a feeling, I have an understanding. I would definitely say I really struggled with the articulation of that understanding, especially within a context that maybe didn't understand that as a skill, right? Mm-hmm. What that can look like is noticing things and then saying what you notice. And, sometimes people don't like when you notice things, right? Sure. So being as general as I can. I think that I always got myself in trouble for saying things that were true, but maybe not understanding how to say things well, right? If I could just put that
Same.
simply, yeah, yeah. You can imagine that makes it hard to establish long-standing relationships. It's
Yes,
actually
yes.
it's something that I think
Very few people stick around. Yes.
it takes a certain type of person, but that skill of understanding, coupled with the skill of articulation, I think is really valuable in this world. But my whole life was not having the skill of articulation and trying to discover it. And so I got interested in many other things along the way. I definitely noticed in my life succumbing to the pressures of a very materialistic society while not necessarily coming from means, right? So I lived in a very abundant part of the world, but I lived within a family that struggled, and so that was its own challenge, was to fit into a world that required keeping up with the distorted price signal, right? And not to say that we had it really hard, because I think honestly, when I look back, we were very blessed in many ways, and so that's the attitude I carry forward in life.
But you only know what you knew.
That's right. Yeah, and until you see it outside of that, you don't recognize what's even possible, right? And so I think the broader recognition of what's possible, coupled with a deep ability to sort of intuit, and also I would say probably a lack of articulateness of being able to just be a really strong person in an environment, led to just probably snow crash of a young mind at an early age. So it took me a long and winding path to get to rocks and geology and energy, because along the way I was really trying to figure out human, right? Like, what does it mean to actually exist in this world with all of the things that are required of us? And, I think we were talking about this in the chat a little bit ago, and I don't know if you caught it, but I think one of the downsides to abundance and luxury in the modern life is that it can feel very unfulfilling when it feels like a lot of the problems are already solved. And it can lead you to looking to fight wars that maybe aren't worth fighting or aren't real, right? And this is, Jordan Peterson sort of harnessed and cohered that unfulfilled potential in a large number of people. And I think maybe looking at that perspective, I was just mad at a world that, I didn't really have any reason to be mad at, right? And so that just led to, not being focused and not being successful. And that was really tough, because I knew that there was certainly some potential there. At least people had been telling me my whole life. So I don't know. It came to a point where I just said, I don't really have anything to lose at this point. Let's just figure out what I can really do. And, something in my life pivoted in my early 20s. And, I was able to take all of those learnings. I was able to take that ability to intuit and understand. And I really worked on sharpening the pencil, and really figuring out, how do I affect this into the world in ways that are meaningful, in ways that are useful. And so, that led me down a path of scientific pursuit, but I realized I really wasn't best served as a peer review published author scientist, right? That is its own skill. I remember.
Is that what you wanted? Was that the goal at the time when you were going in geologist, I'm going to be peer reviewed and publish papers? And
when you go into a scientific endeavor, the game is credentialism in many respects. And so to advance in a degree of high intellect, it requires playing the game of getting advanced degrees, publishing papers, getting those papers cited. It's basically a circular economy of attention. And through that, supposedly, the best scientific pursuits are coming through and well established and resound within the community. And there are a lot of pitfalls with that system, and I think like Eric Weinstein and others really articulate it well. But for me, and it was just noticing that my way of speaking to the world was philosophical, not scientific. And I actually had a professor tell me that when I was writing a scientific paper. The edits were, this is very colorful and not what these papers are supposed to look like, essentially. And there was just one thing along the way that made me notice that as much as I wanted to be recognized as someone of high intellect, as much as I wanted to be in a career that was excellent and that was maybe at the frontier of scientific pursuit, I really was best served as somebody that was more of a communicator and not of a studier or scientific type mind. And so, thankfully, I was smart enough to be in a scientific field of pursuit that is directly relevant to what I think is the most fundamental industry in the world, which is the energy industry, right? And through that was just lucky enough to be able to cohere an understanding of the world through the ways in which we build models of the world, and that allowed me to further extrapolate my model of the world, and it allows you to see things at higher scales that most people don't think about, right? When you're filling up your car with gasoline, you couldn't possibly imagine all of the complexities that go into ever getting that molecule to that pump in San Bernardino, California, or whatever it is. Like it's massively complex. It's most people could never approach an understanding of that without years and years of study. But at the end of the day, that higher order perspective then allows you to think about different problems, right? It wasn't that the problem I was looking to solve in my early career was how do I get more oil out of the ground in this particular location? We were looking at a meta problem. How do we solve this certain carbon problem at scale using a really difficult engineering technique? And that systems level perspective, I think it was a really great introduction to, where this ends up with an intersection of a digital technology that's really interesting that intersects with the most physical aspects of our infrastructure that we have, which is how do we harness that energy to create power and get it to people. And wrapping that all around the axle and looking at it at global scale in terms of not only what is it doing right now, but how can we implement this 10 years from now? It's an impossible challenge. I sometimes get gummed up a little bit even thinking about it myself, and I spend all of my time thinking about this, right? So how could my grandma possibly, comprehend her? And I love her. I use her as an example. It's just there are just so many people in this world that haven't thought about energy or power ever at all. And so, for me, it's not a scientific conversation. Rarely is it ever, right? The deep technical stuff is known and done by thousands, tens of thousands of people. And we're talking billions of people we have to reach. Well, that requires a different skill. And that was, for better or worse, what my whole life had been preparing me for was the skill of articulation of complicated subjects simply to people who needed them simply, right? All of the other interesting things about the specifics of the work, I think, send me down a rabbit hole of what is it really that happens when networks of intelligence start to operate over time, right? And I look at the real beauty of just my grandfather on my mother's side, his career, and I look at the fact that he built his business on the street in Grandview that I built mine, which is just a cool thing. But what was his business? It was electronics computation to do certain mechanical functions in our world that led to the computation we see today. I have a really cool news clipping from the 1960s of his company doing that electronics computation work for the U.S. Mint to make coins.
Wow.
Right? So that's a fun one for me too, right? Little things along the way. My grandfather was actually a collector of coins. He saw silver dollars as a real tangible thing and rarity and all of these other types of tokenizations that occurred within early economies, right? So, none of that was
This
relevant
is the grandfather
to me.
that did the real cool shit of working at Battelle or the other side? Yeah,
this was he and my grandmother met at Battelle in the 1950s, right?
Why don't you tell the
same
people what else your grandfather did? He did a lot of things. He worked on Xerox machine and
Yeah, back in the day, that was the hot ticket, right? Can you imagine a world where you couldn't just take a piece of paper and make a copy of it, right? But that was the world that our grandparents grew up in, and then all of a sudden, these electronics and computational components cohered into systems of information aggregation and propagation. And so, early Battelle days working on what would become the Xerox copy machine. I don't really know how much Xerox was involved or if Xerox was a
I think
spin-off,
they bought
right?
it.
Yeah,
They bought it. They bought the tech.
Yeah,
I
but the
think.
tech was built, more or less here in Columbus at Battelle, and that's fun stuff like that, right?
Very cool.
And so,
Beautiful. And you guys, you started your business on the same street as him. Was that coincidence? Did you see that as well, there's an opportunity there. Might as well connect those two dots, or did it just happen and then?
It was coincidence. I don't even think I knew it until I had already done it.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a
Wow.
lot about this that I'm just uncovering through doing certain things,
Uh-huh.
and that was a fun one for me. That block actually there's a historic Ohio historical sign that's on it. They call it the Bank Block, right? It used to be like an old Castro development. There's just a lot of cool little intricacies about the history there, but for me, it was just noticing the patterns, right? And relevant to a conversation that's happened in the ecosystem recently that probably isn't worth delving into too much. But obviously, Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson had an interesting thing that blew up X
Sure.
yesterday. And
Sure.
anyway, part of it is, delving into what it means to have an epigenetic memory express itself in present day, right? And I think that I'm looking at things like that and I'm noticing that there are just interesting synchronicities that do occur that to me speak to a higher intelligence. And if you want
Definitely a higher order,
yeah,
whatever you
if
want to
you
call
want
it.
to call
but
that
yeah.
God or whatever you want to call
Yes.
it, there is just a real harmony that occurs
Yes.
over time if you pay enough
Paying
attention.
attention. If you're
Yeah.
awake and pay attention and sober.
Yeah.
Not even fully. You don't have to be fully sober. You just have to be paying attention.
I'll drink to that.
Yeah, cheers. Maybe time for another beer.
Yeah, but I look at things like that, and when I notice that they have a particular coherence, I lean into that and I say, well, that is meaningful, and maybe it's not for me to say how or why, or maybe it is just a coincidence, but more and more I'm just noticing that those are the things that are leading me to a better understanding of myself and then the path, right? Like you were saying, how did I get here? Well, it was
Yeah.
a long and winding series of decisions that don't look coherent in and of themselves. And I could have never predicted at the time that this would lead to that. But when I look back on all of it now, it makes real sense in a
Perfect
very
sense. That's a
beautiful
Steve
way.
Jobs quote
Yeah.
of you can't connect the dots moving forward. You connect the dots looking backwards of this step led to that step, not you're just doing the next thing that feels right and resonates in the moment. And then you find yourself naturally, as long as you're not fighting life, which this is, I resonate so much with like the chaos of not knowing and almost fighting myself of where finding my place. And it all happened through Bitcoin for me, and for lack of a better explanation other than Bitcoin. I know it's way deeper than that and bigger, and you understand it more than the listeners do. But when I hear you got interested in geology, you go to Ohio State, you end up at Battelle, you're trying to solve complex problems with what you said are tough or difficult engineering systems to get the most out of them. Was that frustrating? And you were looking for a less frustrated? Were you frustrated with the systems in place, and you knew you saw a better way forward, or a better way to spend your time and energy as opposed to that way, and that's what led you on to the next step? Is that I don't know how to
Yeah.
pose it other than that.
No, I think that's well posed. I definitely think that I had a personal revelation about the work itself that led me to believe that it wouldn't solve the problem it was purported to solve. I think it is a solution oriented approach to a problem people are trying to solve.
And what was the problem?
Carbon emissions, generally speaking, right? So if you say carbon dioxide specifically is the largest problem to deal with, right, from a climate perspective, which is essentially the stance that the UN and other governing bodies take, right, is that, a hydrocarbon, right, so methane, CO2, whatever it is extreme disastrous potential and therefore must be mitigated at all costs, and therefore we need to do it as quickly as possible, and that requires engineering that we don't quite have, right? So how do we get there? And this is where public-private endeavors occur, where research and development is bootstrapped by federal dollars, for instance. There are other mechanisms and governing bodies like the World Bank that might think about doing things like this. But basically, you're looking at governing structures that have basically the end goal in mind and are just paying to say, how do we get there, right? And the end goal being less carbon in the atmosphere, period. So we were going to solve that in part by supercritically storing that carbon dioxide in the subsurface formations, right? The geology, the rocks, often where we would have gotten the hydrocarbons from in the first place, right? So we just took them out and we're going to put some stuff back in, and on average and over time, we will decrease the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So great, okay. In order to do that, you need to do the activity we were doing specifically at such a scale that it would probably be infeasible given the rate of increase of CO2 emitting sources, right? So we're spending a lot of money to chase after a technology that is an environmental solution that the oil and gas companies are going to do well and be first, and it's going to lead to even further tax subsidies to even make sure that it's a market, because otherwise nobody's paying anybody to do this except the government, right? There's no incentive. And
nobody gives a shit. You guys just
well,
want to keep the party going.
yeah.
Everybody else is just partying.
It is a party, right? And I think if there's anything to be abstracted from all of this discussion, is it just possible that we can just create parties over and over and over again? And if that's the case, then cool. Let's have a party. I can't wait. But that wasn't the party that I felt like my abilities were best harnessed through, right? It wasn't that the people doing it were, bad people. They're great people. They're my friends. I love them. It wasn't that the science was not there. It is. Now, this hasn't been tested at scales, right? We've done it in certain pockets, and it works to a certain degree. But if we have this problem out here, which was we've got waste, we've got emissions concerns, we need to clean it up. We have an energy system and it's dirty. Well, I think we can agree that's a valuable outcome. That's a worthwhile pursuit. Whenever you have a situation where you create waste, you have two problems, right? You have, how do I deal with the waste I've already created, and how do I stop making waste in the first place, all right? Now, we're often stuck dealing with the waste that's already made. This is the nature of dealing with, symptoms, not root causes, right?
Sure.
Western medicine really takes this approach in a lot of respects. It's not solving the root issue, it's dealing with the things that occur as a result, right? And I just found that we were always going to be chasing after cleaning up the waste in these processes, right? So felt like, good money after bad. We were just going to keep making more waste, and then we were going to clean it up more, and it was going to be an ever-growing
Population's
pile.
growing.
Sooner or later, you're just going to blow up the earth because you're pressurizing it. I'm kidding. I know that's not the case. Please don't fact-check me, scientists. But the thing that I realized was that my time is finite, and this was through COVID, right? So I had a career. I knew who I was. I knew what we were working towards. I was valuing myself based off of that. And then COVID occurs, and then we spend a year at home, doing the same things, but the whole world had changed.
Differently.
Right?
Yeah,
Just nothing could possibly be the same at that point.
Sure.
And I think that I just saw enough through COVID that affected me to my core that I could no longer even tangentially associate with systems that were that destructive, right? So this is abstracting out of the work I did completely, but the systems that work is performed under are the reason why vaccine mandates ever occurred in the first place, right? So here's what people don't realize, right? Like most of the mandates were mandated simply by the government for any entity that received government funding. And of course, I worked in the middle of an apparatus that was mostly funded by the government to do research, right?
The most funded for like 100 years.
Yeah, and so there's no. I mean, we were getting broadcasts. This is just the best thing going, and everybody's got to take it, and everybody's got to take it, and. Philosophically, I'm not okay with that. I wasn't okay with that. I couldn't sit under that. But I really just recognized that there are these systems of delineation of ideas, for instance, that I think are just clunky in the modern environment, and I think don't keep up with the moment that we're in. And so I felt like I had this idea in mind that these systems, Bitcoin mining, large flexible load compute systems, were a tool to help solve the problem that we were trying to solve in the first place, which is how do we make less waste? How do we have less waste? And I still believe that. I believe that more than I believed when I did this crazy thing of jumping into this. I didn't really fully understand how true that could be. But I believe it more than ever. And I know now that, for me, this is an articulation of why I got interested in this stuff in the first place, which is not let's be good at cleaning up waste. It's that in making less waste in the first place, we have more non-waste.
Sure, sure.
I'm sorry if that sounds silly, but most people don't realize that all of the work that we've ever done throughout history has been to cohere and harness like 1% of all the energy that's actually been available to us at that given time based on these techniques, and most of it's just lost because
That's crazy.
That's the way it's how bad we are relative to nature at doing this. So all we're doing is poor imitation of what nature does relatively perfectly and completely, and we're bad at it. And if we get better at it, my vision, my thesis is that it will get a whole lot better as a result. That's it.
So I brought up the last time we spoke about keeping electrical currents even, and how you brought up how devastating it can be to a grid to have a fluctuating current. And we kind of got into the depths of the way Bitcoin can set these outputs perfectly because the system can handle the off chance that the current does fluctuate in some extreme way or even in a minimal way, but it can dissipate that energy or use that energy in a way that is meaningful as opposed to destructive. And I found that really interesting of how fragile our grid system is. And I felt like you gave a lot of color on how our infrastructure is so fragile in a way that I had never really ever thought about. I mean,
Sure.
I know I got into electrical stocks of like PG&E back in like 2017, 2018, and I was thinking to myself, they were working with Tesla, they were doing the huge battery backups, and those battery backups were able to keep a more consistent flow and protect during times of high usage. They were able to output the energy required. They were able to store energy that wasn't being used in a meaningful way so that it could be used at another time. And that was the beginning of my thoughts on this is far more complex than I had ever really given thought. If I just plug my shit into the wall and it works every time, the most I had ever really thought about it was I've built some pretty sizable studios and doing meaningful content work to myself that required boxes that guaranteed that the certain current was going to hit these machines at all times. And if lightning or anything else were to come in, it's not going to destroy what we did today because the person that we have here is worthy of being recorded.
Yeah.
And that was the most really I ever gave it. I'm like, just plug in the Furman box, plug everything into the Furman box, you're
Right.
good to go. And
Yeah.
you presented it to me in a way that made me feel that the work you're doing is far more meaningful to every person because of how much we rely on these lights and this recording equipment here. And that kind of opened my eyes to complexity in your world that I feel like is very overlooked and by everyone because we just take it for granted that you just plug it in and it's like, oh, it's
We do. Yeah.
however many volts, how many hertz, and
Yeah.
like those are different systems all around the world.
That's
And
right.
and for like, the first question would be like, well, why the fuck are they different? Why are
That's a
you
great
using
question.
different plugs in
Yeah, yeah,
different
yeah.
parts of the world? And like, why do I have to think about that as a consumer? And why
Yeah.
are companies not? Why is there not some standard that's like a global standard of like, no, bitch, you use this, and this is how we do electricity. This is the way to do it.
Yeah.
And I've watched some videos where people say like, this is the best way to make a plug, and this is 4 prongs instead of 3, or 2 instead of 3, or 5 instead of whatever, and thicker for the 240s. And I kind of just want you to talk a little bit about that insecurity of the grid and the way you foresee the future of securing the grid and delivering this more efficient system to all people through the mechanism that is Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, it's actually funny. Efficiency is kind of a luxury request, right? We're going to get to efficiency, but actually reliability probably is most critical, right? It needs to be on and it needs to work at all times. And so you
I
said a
think
lot
they
of,
say, I've heard some arguments that like 72 hours without power, the United States is over.
yeah, the whole world at that
Over.
point. I mean,
Yeah.
consider how interconnected everything is. So in light of that, right? How did we get here? And, what do we do about the way in which it's fragmented and compartmentalized? Japan, actually, I didn't know this, but Japan actually, in and of itself, has two sort of separate grid systems that run on different frequencies. I think they have like a 60 and a 52 or something. I'm not sure what the other one is, but it's different. And the reasons why it's different are known, and a lot of them are simply probably just cultural and historical. But at the end of the day, they haven't changed it, right? Because, I mean, that's complicated and expensive in and of itself.
Sure.
And so that's part of it is nobody would build the system as it is today. But it was a hodgepodge of decisions made over the course of decades and, over a century now, I think that we've been electrifying. And so, where you end up with is a lot of myriad groups of coordination, a lot of overtime regulatory authority that requires and demands that things be done in certain ways. There's a lot in sort of the New Deal era that basically is, leading to the way in which things are becoming utilities today. There are lots of ways in which the modern environment is trying to decouple from large-scale fragility. Cleveland, Cuyahoga County in Ohio, for instance, was a county that carved out somewhat of an exception to be able to start to go after microgrid type approaches in their county, whereas that's pretty difficult elsewhere because you have state governing authorities, you have regional transmission authorities. Basically, you have large-scale interconnect systems that try to couple that all together. You get the fact that, like you said, it can operate at different frequencies at times. And then you get to the hard part, which is how do we make sure it works for everybody and keep it balanced and, ensure that 72-hour condition never occurs, right? Because we can imagine the ways in which that could occur, and we've seen the ways in which blackouts do occur, right? And so, a blackout just being an inability for power to be distributed, right? If you just look at it as a pure inability to have electricity at your home, right? Well, the upstream effects of all of that start to really aggregate really quickly, such that usually, when things break down, they can start to systematically break down, right? So then all of a sudden you get a lot of defensive techniques, right? You get a lot of, well, we need to be prepared if something were to occur. And so that leads to decisions. In the environment prior to Bitcoin mining, decisions looked like, well, we don't need this amount of power all the time, but 1 or 2 days a year, we're going to need a whole bunch more, right? So what do? We create redundancy. We build entire facilities that never get used except for 1% of their time because that 1% is really critical. So we value that 1% a lot, right? We'll pay whatever money it takes for us to have heat on December 23rd in a winter storm. It's just the way the market works. So up until now, we've had this system that we've known how to operate. We've built it incrementally so that it can handle new things coming online, old things coming offline. And there's a whole process of making sure that no matter what happens anywhere within a grid, that the grid itself can handle the power fluctuation that occurs. So easy to plug a house in, that's a minor fluctuation and it can deal with that. If I'm building a large manufacturing facility, that's a serious consideration the grid operators, the utilities are going to have to think about. We need to run the studies, we need models, we need to make sure that we can handle your 40 megawatts of power, and especially if that power fluctuates in and of itself, right? Maybe I'm a cement factory and I have huge spikes of power every once in a while. Well, that's even harder to manage. And that's just one factory. We've got hundreds of thousands, millions of things that we're trying to constantly keep in balance. So the broad point of this is that it's very hard, but we do it. We know how to do it. It's been done. And those that know how to do it are themselves warning that the decisions we're making at scale are making things more fragile, right? What does that mean? The impetus to build intermittent energy sources like solar and wind energy, which are energy sources that are not readily available at all time. They can't be spun up. You are dependent on an outside force to give you that energy. And when you have that energy, you have to dispatch it. There's nothing you can really do with it. And this is why we think batteries are part of the solution, because often we have this energy and we don't know what to do with it. And instead of losing it or wasting it, let's put it in some batteries. But the point is, if we're going to build those out at scale, like California has done, you make the grid inherently more fragile because there's more things fluctuating. And what places like California are doing is shuttering the energy sources that don't fluctuate, right? If I have a natural gas plant or a nuclear facility, we call that base load capacity. A coal plant is base load energy power because it's constant, it's available, and it basically serves as the foundation upon which anything else could possibly be built on. If you go to North Dakota right now, nobody has any sort of fantasy about solar being the way in which they get their power. They're like, we'll take all the coal, please. It gets really cold here in the winter, and we don't need your solar. The point is that solar has its upside, which is low-cost power, right? Environmentally friendly power. Don't want to get into that rabbit hole. Not really.
Or
but
low cost,
the
yeah,
point
whatever
being,
it is, yeah.
But what it does is inherently make the whole system fluctuate in ways, both economically and technically, that create challenges. And we're seeing those challenges look like brownout, blackout conditions in these grids that are incorporating these sources too quickly, right? So what we are trying to do is bring our solution to a marketplace that's in need of solutions that look like an ability to deal with fluctuations at large scales more effectively. Regardless of whether or not we build solar, wind, nuclear, natural gas, etc., that ability to keep the grid at a constant frequency is immutable. And as we grow a system of energy, as we grow complexity of the grid itself, flexible loads are inherently part of how we will possibly be able to do this moving forward. And it's why they're looking to put smart meters at the individual home, for instance. Well, it allows us to meter, in effect, the flows in, flows out from a systems perspective, all right? So the good news there is the power system can handle itself more effectively. The downside is, well, now the system can say, we're at times of peak usage, we're going to curtail your individual home usage, for instance. And we're already seeing that in certain jurisdictions where the power for you to have that power at your home at all times is diminished by some of these smart systems. So there's a real fight coming down the line about how we implement those systems at home scale. But at grid scale, that's all we're doing with Bitcoin mining. Well, it's not all we're doing, but that's the big picture idea that as it relates to grid balancing is that in smart metering large loads of energy and being able to fine tune all of that energy usage within seconds is completely new. We've never been able to do this before. And the implication of that is that it makes everything we do within the system a little bit easier, period, right? So a little bit easier just means less fragile to me, and less fragile means less people lose heat when a certain thing happens, right? So we've already seen this in Texas. We've seen...
I was just going to say, Texas is a perfect example for this.
They're a beautiful example, and now we have the study that shows these events, that shows large miners curtailing very significant, a gigawatt of power sometimes, curtailed to provide that power back to the grid. Now, 3 or 4 years ago, the move would have been fire up a bunch of very expensive, very dirty, what we call peaker plants that can provide extra supply, right? Very expensive, very dirty. Certain economic interests like that as a business model, however, because they have a somewhat guaranteed rate of return, right? So if I'm Warren Buffett and I want to invest $10 billion, set of peaker plants sounds really great because there's a 7% guaranteed rate of return or whatever it is, right? So it's a safe place to put my money. But they can't compete with large flexible loads curtailing their power usage, right? So instead of peaker plants supplying a bunch of power supply, Bitcoin miners are saying we're going to diminish our demand because we're very sensitive to price and we don't want to pay for high price energy. You guys want to pay that for your heat. You should pay it. So we're going to turn off, and we can turn off very quickly, and we can turn off to any degree you want us to and in any time series you want us to, which means that now they're the best friend of a large grid operator that says, we need to be very careful right now because we're at our limits, right? That balancing is the most important part of what we do right now, because if it's imbalanced, then people lose power, right? And when people lose power under that condition, it's not necessarily just that you can flip the switch back on and then power returns, right? There's a very complicated process to start that back up again. So preventing that is a huge opportunity, not just for the energy companies, not just for the utilities, not just for the grid operators, not just for the insurance companies that are behind all, you know what I mean? Like the downstream effects of the system just working a little better benefits everybody. And so for me, what's the most important thing in the world? It's ensuring that people have reliable access to quality power, period. Because everything we do is built upon that. And we know that energy usage is relatively one-to-one in terms of human flourishing. You live a better life when you have access to power, right? So we need to provide power. We need to provide more power in a future where we have more people and more things to do. And we need to make that utilization more efficient, more environmentally friendly. Bitcoin mining just sits in the middle of that problem set and says, we're going to solve it. And the more you let us build, the better we can solve it. So to me, just build as much as you can, as much as the market will allow. Hash price is going crazy right now. Like,
sure is.
Let's build. But let's also build strategically with these people. This isn't like we're coming into your system and we're draining it. This is what sort of the antagonistic argument right now is. Wall Street Journal and New York Times will say they're destroying the environment and they're, boiling lakes. And I forget what the most recent was, but each Bitcoin transaction or block uses like a swimming pool amount of water or some absurd metric like that. Like it matters, but because once you use water, it's destroyed. It's not water anymore.
Right. Yeah, water's gone
anyway. But that's the fear tactic, is that it's using power, which is destroying us. But actually, my argument is, and I think what's really hard to see, is that in using power, it's strengthening the system. It's creating a more anti-fragile system over time. And I think there are so many other things that will happen once it's further integrated. And at the end of the day, this is simply a consumer of electricity. There are other types of compute that could do similar things. I think this isn't just limited to Bitcoin mining, but Bitcoin mining was probably the first at scale to ever even be able to consider this. And because it's so new, the implications of it, I think, are yet to be realized by a lot of people.
Would this type of problem solution, does this push Bitcoin mining into like a government subsidy realm to where there is some guarantee of, we want you to operate during this time and not during this time, and we're going to offset some of those costs to ensure your business model? Because that's one of the biggest problems I see with Bitcoin mining today, is the fact of, especially Bitcoin Core, is so controlled. And like right now, they're having the fights with inscriptions, and they're saying we don't want to do this, or
some people
fake. They're fake. They're not full block. So whatever they want to say. But the miners are making more money than ever. Hash rate's higher than it's ever been.
That's right.
And it seems to me, we've talked about this before, whether on here or personal lives, is how do you invest so much money into something as a businessman or a company that could then be one decision pulls the plug on the investment you made, a massive investment, if you will, if you go at scale to be a meaningful player in this game. How can you have a base load, if you will, of I'm putting money in and I'm expecting such return, but it's so volatile and it can fluctuate at any time, and then Bitcoin Core can make a decision that's going to crush my mining returns overnight. It seems like what you're the implications, how grand the implications are to this system if it were implemented with those ideas in mind. Even if it weren't, even if it's just strictly, I'm here to make only money, not to provide any service to the system.
Yeah.
It seems on some level, if there is the off chance that you could be of service to the system, that the government would need to step in, or local city infrastructure governments would need to step in and say, hey, under these conditions, we will make these type of monetary considerations to your operation. Is that something you're seeing in the future of, like, this is where government and Bitcoin meet?
Yeah, and I think let's carve out two separate paths there. I think the fee discussion is a separate discussion. I would love to
Sure,
get into that. I think
sure.
it's a really relevant topic right now. But when you're talking about the fundamental constraint of financing decisions that are made at large levels for companies to get into the space, and how do they return their capital and to their investors meaningfully enough and not get burned? Well, we've seen people get burned, right? We know that when you go into business, you take risks, and sometimes those risks don't work off, and we've seen companies go bankrupt. That's not I think, novel to this industry, for instance, but I think it is the nature of exploration or anything like that. But the business model that we're seeing right now, that I would say is the only game in town, so to speak, right? I think there are many different ways you can carve out a business model in this industry. So I'm speaking about like the larger picture of it. When you are engaging in Bitcoin mining, you are usually always at this point engaging in power trading strategies as well, right? Hedging strategies, trading strategies. There are already government incentives and programs, or let's just say mandated pseudo-governmental programs, because utilities are governed but they're not government, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing where, like, AEP is a utility and they're governed and mandated to do certain things, but they're a private company, right? So now, if I'm a Bitcoin miner, I am basically engaging in large-scale power contracts, and the way in which my business survives is by not being purely dependent on the market force of Bitcoin mining, period. If you got caught unhedged in the last couple of years, you probably got hurt.
Wrecked,
right?
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of Core Scientific was a good example where their power contract got rugged, more or less, and the prices spiked under different conditions that basically made it so that their price in was unsustainable. And they, obviously, when market conditions got bad, they had to file for bankruptcy. They were the strongest looking company in the space in 2021, and then they're just now digging themselves out of a bankruptcy process, right? So it is difficult. The way in which it's looking like it works best right now is to be pure participants in the energy and power markets themselves, and you are then using Bitcoin mining as that tool, as the operator at risk, right? So somebody who invests in Bitcoin mining machines are going to pay to operate those machines. They're going to pay for electricity, and that's their input cost, and then they're going to hope that hash price in the market and their machine is efficient enough that they're making money on the back end, right? They're usually making money by not mining Bitcoin for a certain period of time. That's just kind of a given, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. So the business model of using the economic weight of a large load, when I have 50 megawatts of power consumption and I go to somebody to make a deal, I have a lot of leverage because that's a lot of power, right? Often that will require a lot of upfront costs, right? Power deposits, et cetera. Credit worthiness is a big issue, right? So I'm not even going to take on a power contract with some Bitcoin mining entity if I can't see that they have money in the bank, because a lot of people have made a lot of promises. People have gotten hurt. It's been the Wild West. It really has. And a lot of people have gotten hurt is the point. But the public entities that are thriving right now have diversified enough that they're not solely dependent on mining income. They're, a lot of them, still taking the asymmetric upside bet of Bitcoin, and everything is a game of how do you minimize your input costs as much as possible. And the best way to minimize input costs right now is to play those games of curtailment, of demand response, right? If I'm a miner in Texas right now, I participate in a program where the government will demand, or excuse me, not the government, but the transmission authorities will demand at certain times of peak stress that large loads diminish their demand under certain conditions, and often they're paid for that as well, right? So it isn't just that I'm not mining Bitcoin, it's that I'm generating revenue by essentially selling that power availability back to the market, right? So these are just financial strategies at the end of the day, right? Bitcoin revenue is just a new component of that, but that's basically what we're seeing. And the risk I think a lot of people see right now is when that can go too far. And what are the risks of centralization that occur when your business model is dependent on participating in certain programs, right? What are the risks that occur when, basically you end up, like you were saying, in a condition of centralized fragility when some of these large players have too much, let's say, share of the hash rate or whatever it might be. At the end of the day, all of these public miners are beholden to OFAC compliance at the federal level, which creates a point of fragility. Basically, it's an attack vector for...
What's OFAC?
It's basically the anti-terrorism laws that occur within the monetary system, and I forget what OFAC stands for, but it's essentially the subset of the rule structures that basically delineate, how to prevent money flowing to a Hamas, to a North Korea, right?
Yeah.
And so there was an issue with Marathon, with Marapool recently, a few years ago now, actually, and censoring non-OFAC compliant blocks. And then so again, you're starting to see some pressure occur at the block level. This is what a lot of this stuff about Ocean and the ordinals and the fees are really starting to get to is, what are we allowing within this block accretion, right? And how do we delineate from an industry perspective these rules so that hopefully, I think at the end of the day, the game theory plays itself out so that we're trying to figure out what the anti-fragile way through is. Like, what's the better way for us to keep this system functional and preventing it from being usurped? I don't know how we get around the moment we're in where we're going to have to decide, what is it that we're willing to give up for the philosophical tenets of Bitcoin that we're trying to accomplish here? Because if all we're doing is creating a new banking system, that wasn't ever the point. We haven't accomplished anything at that point. We've just digitalized the dollar in a way that's a little different.
Sure.
At the end of the day, we're going to have to start making decisions about how we carve out jurisdictions of defensibility for the hash rate to be able to survive what's likely just a regulatory capture game that's occurring right now, right? So to me, the defensibility makes the most sense alongside the large power players, the utilities, right? And when I'm thinking through, like, what's the most meaningful thing we can do right now to defend the ability to perform proof of work and keep this system alive, it's to make it so that it's a critical tool for some of the largest, most powerful entities that exist today, which are the power utilities, right? And so if we can make this make sense to them, I don't need them to believe in Bitcoin. I just need them to recognize that this large flexible load, is commercially advantageous enough for them that this is a good thing. And then we'll fight about the other tenets of money.
Yeah, you don't need to talk about, we don't need to believe in Bitcoin. You need to
right.
believe that this solves a problem and it's not a monetary risk.
That's right.
It's advantageous to you to take on.
And the monetary risk, right, that's when you get back to, well, how can I be certain that Bitcoin has value at any given time? And that is a hard argument. I think if I've seen one hurdle in all these conversations with power and energy people who don't think about Bitcoin, right, it's just that, what underpins it? Why am I certain it's not going to zero tomorrow, right? All these same things we've all sort of been through before, but they're often so used to dealing with only that which is real. And, I think at the end of the day, a digital game is hard to recognize, right? So
I talked to Evan about this yesterday. Kendra asked me, how is bonk worth money? And I'm like, well, how is my first question is, how is anything worth money? What's money?
Yeah.
And then, very quickly you're into an economic money. What is money?
Right.
And I've always said, people don't really understand when I say it, but I say, you are the money. You are money.
It's my favorite thing that you've ever said.
I don't think most people understand what I'm really saying, but I don't know. There's no way to explain it.
Yeah.
It's just that you are the money. You decide what money is. If you go out and collect enough rocks, you are the thing that makes the money. You got a giant pile of rocks. Now, if you have 5 rocks, if they're really neat and shiny, you might be able to sell one of them to somebody for some amount of money if you're a good salesman.
Yeah.
But if you get a giant pile of rocks, that's as tall as your house, big as your house, somebody will pay good fucking money for those rocks. Now it's up to you to decide that. That's why I say you're the money. You are it. You are in total control of whatever you decide money is and the way you're able to bring value to any given moment. And people look at you even as subjective money. Parents look at children as like, that's the thing I care about. This is what I value over all other things, and I'm willing to do anything to feed this one thing or to take care of this one thing. And you just said they wonder how Bitcoin's is it going to be worth something tomorrow? And it's like, if you're an energy company and you don't see how energy is literally creating Bitcoin, it's really tough for me as a person that's semi well versed in Bitcoin to say like, you're in the business whether you like it or not. You are in the business of creating Bitcoin, whether it's an offshoot of what you do and you don't care how your electricity is used. It's literally keeping the lights on at places where, at the bank, for instance, and it's like the bank printing at the fucking federal mint. You are the one turning the lights on. How do you not, and like running the presses? How do you not understand that the electricity is the money?
That's right.
It literally is the currency. So no money in, no money out. And you can call money whatever you want, whether it's the electrons flowing through the system or the dollars coming out of the building that the electrons are feeding the building to generate the currency that you're wheeling out on your $100 blue faces, whatever you want to call it, or even my digital representation on the screen. That's still the electric company feeding me that. It just seems like a disconnect that you would have to explain to the electric company how Bitcoin is worth money, or how it's literally electricity, like stored. I don't.
Yeah. It's a translation that's new enough that we're still learning to speak the language, right? This is, for me, thinking a lot about words and spells. And again, we've talked a lot about this. I do think this is a moment where it's so new that we're struggling to find the right words to really describe it, right? People in the industry were like, well, Bitcoin mining is a battery, right? And then a lot of people got really mad about that, and it was like, it's not technically a battery. It is like, well, we're just trying to figure out an analogy here. Let's work with this, right? So, all right, maybe battery was imperfect, right? Maybe there's another way to think about it. But at the end of the day, you're looping all those systems back to something that's fundamental, and what's fundamental is electrons, right? If what's fundamental is the way we're cohering molecules in space and time to be able to harness them such that we can focus them, right?
Without completing the loop, there is no money.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's it. And so but we forgot it, right? This is the thing that I think is the reason why everything is so weird today, is that we forgot that very simple truth that I think has largely been well enough understood for most of human civilization, because digital didn't exist prior to, right? What we had were abstractions that the church tried to cohere. I think a lot of religious effect was trying to harness that money, that energy, that human spirit in ways that would build upon itself, right? We built cathedrals as a testament to the coherence of it, right? And our ability to do that was largely grounded by that which was real. It was only the commodity space of stuff that we can move around, right? It's different now, and therefore, because it's so different and because it has worked so well our whole lives, we've not ever had to reckon with that reality yet, right? If you're in a village in West Africa somewhere, you probably deal with that reality every day, and it's a different thing, but we in this world do not. And therefore, it makes perfect sense to me why somebody who spends their whole life thinking about electricity doesn't think about money.
Sure.
We made it so that they didn't have to, right? And they've done it forever. But it's not like we just started thinking about this either. Like the Henry Ford quote is brought up all the time now, and I think it's relevant enough to really think about the fact that 100 years ago, we were thinking about this too. And then some things happened in the middle and it got really wonky. And, there are some people that think that maybe there were intentional ways in which we made it wonky, right? Because that served certain people. But, Yeah, it's always been fundamental. It's just that our ability to think about numbers at scale are really limited, I think, honestly. And so when you start talking like how much money is in the global economy right now, like just as a, regardless of whether it's factual or not, but just call it in the quadrillions or something, right? And try to imagine what 100 quadrillion dollars looks like. It's just a nonsense. It doesn't mean anything, actually, right? So, but people know, people know what it means when you try to like throw a rock across a lake or something, right? Like your arm can only throw it so far. The water can only handle it so well, right? Like what you're seeing is a pure energetic exchange. And we know that hitting people is wrong because that energetic exchange was offensive and not allowed under certain, preconditions. But when we spend $100 million to build a missile that blows up 30 people, right? We don't feel it in the same way, and it's the same type of abstraction. I think is honestly we've just abstracted all of this away from pure energy, like conceptually within our minds. We haven't actually, but conceptually,
Impossible.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so therefore we got confused, and I just think that's where we are now is we're confused. So for me, it's like I just feel like I'm trying to convince people that the thing we already knew and understood is possible again today, and that it maybe is valuable to do. But I definitely get why it loses most people when you say, you are the money, or, money is just energy, right? It's just, these are just translations of things. And again, I think we need to find better words at this point.
Interesting you brought up the church regulating things. Are you hip to the church regulating fish?
No, say more.
So they had a problem with fish being transported from the shores into the inlands. It would go bad, and people were getting really sick eating the fish because it would be transported in a carriage in the sun, so not good. And the church was losing parishioners to the said bad fish.
Sure.
So the fish got oversight by the church. Now the church had a fish problem because the church understood, being the educated people, that you can't just have the fish just rolling through. So they made it more efficient to get the fish to where it needed to go, made sure fish was cooled or kept covered or whatever it was. Now all of a sudden they have a shit ton of fish that people need to eat. And if you don't get rid of the fish, or the fish aren't being sold properly, which they were making people sick, so people stopped. Now fishermen don't have income.
Yeah.
What do? Well, no meat on Fridays, baby. Guess what? Fish ain't meat. And now all of a sudden you have a loophole that makes people eat fish again.
Eat all the fish,
All
baby.
the fish.
Yeah.
And now fish is flowing. Now the fish flows.
Yeah.
And it's because of the church's involvement with the fish. So that's really interesting that you talk about the way some systems are implemented and oversaw. So, you have a really interesting perspective on Bitcoin that I think is more grounded than most people that are tied to number go up. How do you have such energy for Bitcoin without having strictly number go up energy? And, I'm sure in your mind you have some idea of Bitcoin. You're thinking Bitcoin's more valuable than it is today. It's undervalued today. I feel like it is. I'm not going to lie to the people. I feel like, how are you not buying Bitcoin? And how is it not part of your financial future? How are you not holding some Bitcoin today in your portfolio? And I would ask you, what do you think the future of Bitcoin is as a money, or as whatever term you want to put on it? I know we just said we need better words, we need better spells. I don't even know if we should call it a money. It is, but it is more of a representation of something, and we don't really have the words today to call it. And when people say it's going to replace banking, it's going to do this, it's going to do that, and I'm like, banking necessarily isn't ever going to be replaced, because that's a perspective of human conditioning that I may not want to take on the responsibility that is taking care of my money, or over the responsibility that is self-custody. So
it's a risk.
It's very risky. And even if take the money out of it, even if a bank just becomes a room of boxes with guards standing out front, even if it's military guards or whoever they have to pay, armed guards, I'm willing to pay a bank to store some stuff in there as long as I can come and get it with a key or my keypad or whatever my code is
Right.
to get it out. So bank to me has a lot of different definitions. Money has a lot of different definitions.
Yeah.
But how are you approaching these conversations in which most people would look at you and think he's just thinking Bitcoin's going up and it
Yeah.
needs to be talked about in these types of manners? How are you handling that? And like, what is your perspective on number go up on Bitcoin?
I'm definitely in a moment now where my life is being fully affected by swings. So, like you were saying, how can you not be affected by number go up? Well, I certainly am in the way in which the cultural context
Of course.
approaches me,
Sure,
right?
sure.
I am not in that my mentality changes necessarily, except often when number goes up, I'll think, fuck, I should have bought more.
Well, not
but
even
then,
that. I mean,
right?
but even
yeah.
them hitting you up. I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody's calling you, they're not calling you when it's at 15,000.
That's right, that's
They're
right.
like, oh, it's going to crash, but it hits 40,000. Now you're probably in high demand, and people want to talk to you just like they do me.
Yeah, and I think that in and of itself is good enough for now that I don't ever need to like go seek those people and when it's 20K, be like, You'll see, just wait,
sure,
you'll see,
sure,
right?
sure.
Like people will come to it in their own time like that. And for me, I had to ignore price because I could have been swept under by mania and by depression, for instance, within the market cycles, right? When it is $60,000, it's very easy to think, and I think a lot of us thought that like we're going to 100,000, that this is
Sure,
a train
just the
that's
beginning.
not stopping.
Yeah, we'll never
and-
see 10 again. We're never going to see 15 again, whatever it is. Say
and
goodbye.
sooner or later, stuff like that will be true. But when you get caught up in predicting it and needing to be right within a certain time sequence, I think
it's
you can
dangerous.
get lost. And I definitely, over the last 3 or 4 years, myself in many ways have been right, but really wrong about timing. And because of that, I've had to like step back from being right about when things occur, but just recognizing that, I recognize trends enough to want to follow the wave. And then for me, it's just figuring out when to get on my surfboard, right? And so that's why I really enjoy some of the group chats with people in like the Solana economy that I'm not paying attention to. Like, well, plug me in. Let me understand what's happening here and see if I can learn to ride the waves better. But for me, this tool that has been developed, that is Bitcoin, is of primary importance to the way forward because it allows for an optionality that didn't exist before. And I don't think that it solves everything. I don't think that it replaces everything. I do think that the nature of most people is that they'll want to trust a third party of some sort, like you said, because they don't want to custody all of their assets themselves. And I totally understand. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. If I have $20 million, I don't know that I feel comfortable putting it on a USB drive and then having that solely my responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So multi-sig approaches occur, right? Collaborative solutions that are non-custodial occur, right? There are ways in which you can engage with the ecosystem that still allow you to keep custody but don't put you necessarily at risk, right? And then you go sort of all the way kind of to the further edge of that, like Coinbase is probably as close to a bank as we have today, right? And they're in an interesting position where they're having to sort of be the tip of the spear for this fight to entrench and instantiate DeFi while not being D themselves, right?
Sure.
They're very centralized.
Very centralized.
It's like these are actual real conversations that we're having and we're trying to understand.
The most centralized.
Yeah, right. And so then it's, well, what are their motives, right?
Yeah.
I've had some interesting conversations recently where I'm trying to understand, and I think the place I've come to is that there are things that are necessary in the first 5 years that maybe aren't necessary year 20, for instance, right? And
Or
so
year 100 or
right.
whatever it is. Extrapolate as far as you want. But
And so I don't think that the solution today is the solution we need in 50 years, but I do think in order to maybe get to something that looks like a different solution, in the middle of that is a transition. And I think in that transition, you're going to have things that look and feel like traditional banking services, right? I don't think that the banks go away in this scenario. I do think we've allowed the possibility of self-custody of your property for meaningfully the first time for most people on this planet. That optionality now exists, and I think defending that optionality is most important. It isn't to say everybody's going to do this, but as long as we have it as an option, it allows us to think about things in a different way.
it sure seems like a new gun.
Yes, it's if we're Spider-Man and we're pointing our guns at everybody, right? It's
Yes.
it's defensive in that way, right?
Yes.
What we're not saying is this is an attack vector and now we're going to fund all the terrorism we've ever been
Right.
waiting for, right? This is
Right.
Elizabeth Warren's fear is that now the world's going to fall apart because we being the centralized authority of the US Treasury and the governance structure of the United States can't keep tabs on everything. Well, they can't today. And I think it's
Right.
time we confront that reality,
Yeah.
right? That AML and OFAC and all these things actually are insubstantial tools and they
Yes.
aren't solving the problem they're purported to solve. Right?
Anybody who's dabbled in the crime world knows that cash is just freely handed off
Sure.
to anyone, and it's like
and
nobody's
what-
thinking about that, right?
What is Iran paying for all of their terrorism with right now? It's $6 billion US that our
Sure.
government handed to them,
Sure.
right? And so let's really talk about what's real. And that to me is the point, is that what's real is that we have this optionality now for the first time, and the implications of that are so profound, and they know it, that they'll fight it, and if they get their way, will try to prevent any decentralized, permissionless peer-to-peer transactions from ever occurring. Everything needs to go through the AML and centralized governance structure of the US dollar. That's the goal. And that's what a CBDC would look like. That's what any sort of digital dollar is going to end up being implemented as, even if on its face to start it's not, right? And so basically, therefore, to me, defending that optionality is important, because as long as we all globally have that optionality, we get to coordinate a little differently now. And I think given that coordination ability, we'll start to make different decisions about how money works. Like the whole central thesis of this is that the way money works is governed by an apparatus that we have been led to believe is the most capable of doing it, and the result has been not great.
Sure.
And that's really hard to see and say in the middle of localized abundance and flourishing, right? But globally, the net results of the US dollar system, and especially post 1970, have been catastrophic.
Right.
And the results of that, the implications of that, are only starting to be seen in the fracturing that is occurring. And if in that transition away from that to the next thing, we make the mistake of losing the optionality of a purely self-custodial, decentralized network of transactions, we will end up with another system that is similar. We will not flourish as a result of that. It's very likely that we will just lead to some sort of diminishing totalitarian state, because
That's what it would be. I mean,
it's what it is right now.
so
actually.
it is what it is right now. And anybody who's saying that Bitcoin, we need to defend Bitcoin, I think its existence is proof that there is a system in place that is trying to control everything, and this alternative solution does put that control in jeopardy.
Yes.
And if that's the case, how much is something like that worth? And does it even need to be defensible? It's like saying, my dad's always joked, my dad was a drill sergeant after Vietnam. He served in Vietnam in the Army. He's always said the reason nobody's invading North America is because everybody here owns 5 or 6 guns at least in our world, as being my dad's from the South. I have a pistol right here. I have 4 or 5 in my house all over if anybody comes into my house at any given time, I am prepared. And that is the state of the United States.
Right.
And that's why people don't come to invade us, is because you're not just fighting in military at that point. You're literally going to fight an armed citizen. You're going to meet armed citizens across the nation. And that is something that you can't account for. You
That's
can't
right.
calculate.
It's an optionality that exists.
So if that's the case, I mean, how are people not seeing somebody like Elizabeth Warren as the absolute pinnacle enemy? And how do you not view Bitcoin as the most valuable asset available? I mean, how is it at 40,000 US dollars when it is the only currency today that we can easily send back and forth to one another without any questions or without anybody, watching, other than physical cash? But then you do have receipts of, I went to the bank, I withdrew this money, unless you're getting money from some other source that,
Right.
I mean, even at the casino, you can't leave the casino. They don't let you leave the casino without signing tax slips for a certain amount of dollars. I don't know what it
course.
is anymore, but
Yeah.
I mean, there's a paper trail everywhere, and at some point, you have to answer some questions about that if and when the time comes. So, how do you view it as being valued today? Do you view it as being super undervalued today, and we're like trying to convince people that it is more valuable than it is, one step at a time?
I don't really know that I have a good feel for why is it the price today ever. And this is part of the reason why I've tuned out from price largely is that anytime I would get myself in a mode of I need to explain why it is. And like you said, people ask you, right? And they're like, well,
Yeah.
what's going on with Bitcoin? And I'm like, I don't know, actually. I really don't. I'd say there are a couple things at a large scale that are playing into this. One is that you have the most percentage of holders not moving their coins or keys ever, right? The largest percentage we've ever
By
seen.
a
So you
lot.
have a
Yeah.
sticky majority that is not moving anything, right? Then you have a market function of miners and others who have a business that they have to keep afloat. So that's usually where the liquidity is coming in as well. New coins are sold and then brought to the market, et cetera. I think what's happening right now is two things. One, we're in this period where I think smart money has already figured this out, and I think they're quiet about it. And I think because of that, there are very large games that are being underplayed right now, likely to diminish price, both to demoralize existing holders to remove some of those coins from that
get
frozen
moving.
capacity. Yeah. You get a little frustrated or bills get a little tight, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think there's an accumulation effort that's undergoing that's large, it's quiet, and that we would be surprised by when it comes to fruition. I think there are nation states that have already accumulated this and haven't told people, for instance. And therefore, to me, because the market is not aware of those things, I just don't know that
Just
the
information
price is.
asymmetry
Yeah,
that's
I
not
genuinely
playing
believe it's vastly undervalued just based on current holdings relative to even just some of the fragilities that exist in the ecosystem of centralized custody. Right. I think there's going to be a massive price accumulation that occurs when we really figure out how much Bitcoin is actually available on centralized exchanges, globally speaking, right?
Sure.
And I think that unwinding is going to be really interesting to watch over the next year. But yeah, for me, the fundamental tenet of what it allows us to do is so novel and applicable to everything that we do in this world that, of course, like the dollar value today kind of means nothing to me except just
Yeah.
in relative terms to how much I can accumulate it for. Because I know that the tool and what it allows us to do is so profound. But like you said, does it need to be defended? I do think that it does, actually. This is the thing that,
Isn't just like having it and using it,
yeah,
or maybe running a miner
right.
is defending it.
A node probably is the
action-
most important thing, I
Sure.
think, right now. I think the more we need to be propagating nodes more so than we are now. I definitely think that it needs to be defended from protocol level changes that are still possible,
I
right?
was just going to ask about that. I didn't even know if you want
Yeah,
to talk about that, but like, how fragile do you think Bitcoin is
Yeah.
to the core team, and how vulnerable do you think it is at a protocol level?
I think in any system, the most marked weakness, the easiest point of vulnerability is always the people, right? So to me, if I were powerful and nefarious enough and wanted to stop this, I wouldn't stop it through public opinion. I would usurp one or two core developers and, maybe corrupt them
Interesting.
enough to make them a pawn for destruction in that way. Because there aren't that many of them, right? There just really isn't. And so,
People are cheap.
well, and that's the thing. Sooner or later, the question is, do you have the optionality in your life to say no to what is likely a very enticing offer to corrupt, right? This is, to me, what gets so interesting about this at scale is that I've always found in my life, I've seen it in others, that Bitcoin will humble you one way or another, and how you deal with that humility is really important. And those of us that get to the other side of it in humility and recognize that this is something that's much larger than ourselves, like I'm not
I'm not motivated by resource in the same way I used to be. Like
Sure.
I'm willing to put my life into something because I
Yes.
believe in it enough. But
Because you're the money.
yeah,
You take all my money today. I will show up tomorrow and I will make value
yeah,
there. Yes.
exactly.
I don't care if it's digging holes, cleaning
Right.
toilets.
I know
Tell me.
you'd be the best toilet cleaner they've ever
Amen,
seen.
baby. I'm
I've
telling
heard
you.
it, and that's real, right? So that doesn't concern me as much as some of the fragilities that occur if people don't care enough in this moment, right? Like the governance decisions that we're making as a network are critically important, and sometimes we can do things that seem like they're advantageous in the moment that lead to a downside effect down the line. So we need to be very careful about what we're demanding or arguing for in the moment, right? And so, to me, defending Bitcoin looks like educating myself as much as possible, trying to communicate and bring attention to this as much as I possibly can, to not extend myself so far that I hurt the cause in the process, right? But at the end of the day, it's simply to be that node. Like you're saying, you are the money, right? I've been abstracting like we are the nodes in this system,
Yeah.
and that the Bitcoin is the propagation of information that's between us. And right now, that feels very hard coded and physical, but I think ultimately it's vibes. Like I think that which is non physical between us energetically is the closest articulation to money that we can cohere. And because we don't understand that, we abstract that into physical objects and numerical symbols and
Sure.
things like that, right? But at the end of the day, that which is harnessed is that which is between us and society, that which we affect through that aim, right? So to me, defending Bitcoin is just defending communities. It's defending our ability as people to harness and cohere our energy positively, right? So Bitcoin is a means for me to tell that story, right? As we transition to these digital tools, I get to use Bitcoin as an ability to create analogy for upliftment of all things, of all people, right? And so the systems level approach of that just looks like defensibility is in the hearts and minds of people, right? And if there are enough of us that believe these things as tenets of our lives, the system exists. We'll want to use it. The market demands it.
Amen. Do you think that Bitcoin and I don't want to say as is, but the term Bitcoin as applied to the BTC chain today, do you think that the name Bitcoin sticks as the name that we're saying forever, like Kleenex?
Yeah.
Or do you think that this is the first iteration? And we've kind of met through the forks of the past, and that's kind of
Yes.
what brought us together was the understanding of forks and holding Bitcoin that was pre-fork Bitcoin is a big deal. Was a big deal to me, and still is to a lot of people I love and care about their thoughts. And
Right.
do you think that the forkability of the protocol is another point of defensibility? Or do you think that the attack that somebody like Senator Warren, for lack of a better person to point at in this moment, do you feel like that is pointing at the entire space and she's using the word Bitcoin as the Kleenex example of she means this entire space?
Yeah, like the word God. I think often terms can get in the way as much as they can help. And I do wonder because I notice the political sphere will say crypto often to mean all things. They'll use it sometimes just to talk about Bitcoin, right? Like crypto mining. I get it. There are some Doge miners out there, but when we're talking crypto mining, we're talking BTC, right? It is what it is. So
Hedge.
the conflation of those things can be problematic, and especially in Bitcoin when we are trying to differentiate from everything else, right? Because of proof of work, because of certain
Resiliency. Yeah.
and the nature of provenance. Where did it come from, right? Who started
Sure.
it? Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. It's not easy to talk about why a pseudonymous creator is important, but it is. I do think that there's an avenue for us to explore new terms through this, right? And so I am of the camp that I believe that we don't need to call it Bitcoin for it to work, right? The tool is the tool. The tool is the set of understandings that we can implement. And especially in a post-fork environment where there's argument over, I would say most people in Bitcoin don't believe it's a legitimate argument, but I think the argument is ongoing, right? There are legal cases that exist. This isn't necessarily a moot topic. It is just one that's not well articulated in the public sphere. I do think that it's hard to talk about the things that did happen in the fork wars, and therefore it's going to make it really hard to talk about what's about to happen with
Sure.
more fork wars, with more differentiation, with it going wide. And I think that's a super interesting topic to explore, and I don't understand enough of it myself. Cheers.
Cheers, King. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks for coming over today.
It's been 2 years pretty much since I met you for the first time.
Is it
here.
really?
Yeah, I think it was like this week in December a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I guess it was.
here.
We got here November 11th, and then we
Yeah.
were here for just a couple weeks, and then we met. Yeah.
What a-
Cheers to that. Congratulations.
Cheers. Here we are.
2 years later, baby, we made it. 2-year
did it.
anniversary.
We did it.
That's nice.
It
That's
is.
nice. We
It's
made
been-
it 2 years.
it's been great.
Hey, we're two people that say things they shouldn't say all the time. We made it 2 years.
Look at us.
Who thought we'd be here?
There's such power in that, though.
It really is. You know, I was telling Evan, we talked yesterday about the struggle of being a young man and trying to find your place and your people and your tribe, and how powerful Bitcoin was in finding my people.
Yeah.
And it really settled me down a lot. You know, I felt for a long time that, like you mentioned earlier, that I was like fighting against the world, wanting things to be this way, or this thought that things were being held back, or we were doing things in the wrong way, or whatever. And now I think to myself, everything is perfect, and let's not fuck it up.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to talk about Bitcoin in that regard, especially with AI where it is today, and people talking about RSA and is Bitcoin going to be able to crack things, or supercomputers going to be able to crack things? And if you did figure it out, what is the incentive to do so? Because it wouldn't be news that we heard about. It would be news that we experienced. Everyone would experience. If the wrong person had the wrong power,
Yeah.
the grid would shut off.
Yeah.
If the wrong person had the wrong power, the banking system ends and your debit card stopped working, and now there's bank runs, and now you learn that there is no money and there is nothing backing this money up. And now I have Bitcoin, but I don't have whatever means it is, the internet broadcasting to my house, and to use the tools at hand. And you think about how fragile these things are. It's a lot easier to deal with the fragility once you meet a tribe of people that you can talk to these things about in a meaningful way, to where it's like, oh, all right, I'm not a fucking lunatic, or at least it's not as crazy as I
I'm not
thought.
alone.
I'm not alone here.
Yeah.
I'm amongst some men that are thinking about things in the same vein that I am, and that really allowed me. I mean, you guys heard the baby crying a little bit ago. Thanks for putting up with that a little bit. You're going to hear more of it over the next year. And way to go powering through it. You did a great job.
I'll be honest with you. I didn't really hear it. So,
Awesome. Amen, baby. Amen. Thanks, God. And, it made me feel more capable and more, a family being more tangible, more possible for me, because men that thought similar were having raising families and were very successful. And I was like, man,
Yeah.
oh, well, I'm the issue then.
It didn't. It didn't change for men generally. It's not like you had never met somebody in your life that
Yes.
didn't have a kid, right?
Right.
It was, you didn't see that in yourself until, right?
It took me meeting people that had these same energies and had worked through these energies. And
Yeah.
for a long time, it was, why are we holding ourselves back at such a monumental level? And it felt like everything in society was against success
Yeah.
of different thinking.
And then you think, because of that, why would I bring something in?
Yes, why would I bring something in that's so
Yeah.
full of friction? And
Because
then,
I can't affect it.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
And then through time, I realized that I was swimming up current, and it's like I was really fucking up trying to swim up this river. This river is a very powerful river, and if I just turn
Yeah.
and go with it, I can there's a lot of people swimming that I catch up with and look at and be like, hey, we're swimming here. And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, we're swimming.
Isn't it
And it's
great?
like, yeah, it's great. This is awesome. And it's like, man,
Yeah.
I was swimming the other way. It was fucking tough. And they're
You
like,
told
yeah, me too.
It's just what my parents were doing their whole lives.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, man, thanks for being here. And it's like, they're like, I'm not here for you. I was just swimming. I'm just
Yeah.
here. And it's, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So now it makes things feel possible. And to be able to have these conversations with somebody like yourself that really is in the thick of it in Bitcoin. It's, 6 years ago, we were really in it then. And I've been in Bitcoin since 2011. I really got into it, started reading deep 2013, long before most people that I've met. But until I was able to have meaningful conversations with other people that had differing perspectives and really meeting them, I didn't go out of my way to go to Bitcoin meetups in 2014 or 2015.
No.
It was 2017 I started to meet you all, 2018 really started to connect, and not until 2019, 2020 that I actually started meeting some of you in real life. 21 I meet you, and Evan and Colby and Chris are all coming here to the house, and we're hanging out, and it's like, oh, wow, we could really do some things if we harness this energy and direct this energy in a way that's meaningful. And by do things, I mean start families, I mean affect business, I mean affect policy, I mean influence some younger men or older men or people of power, or anyone for that matter, to either change their perspective or see the light in themselves, whatever that may be, just like you all did to me, and how powerful that can be. So, it's really interesting to see you light up over the past 3 years of getting to know you, and to see you today speaking about things that you are so confident in, of like, no, I know the way forward here. I see a future that involves the path we're on today and a pleasant road ahead, not a friction-filled, we're climbing mountain road ahead. I see an easier path, and it's going to be nice, and it's going to be, are there going to be hurdles? Yes, but
We're floating downstream now.
we're swimming down the river now, and it
Yep.
feels like these things are just a matter of time, and it feels like somebody like Elizabeth Warren is the one swimming upstream, and it's like you look at her, it's like she is struggling. I mean, she looks like she's just so mad, and Bitcoin's not going to be stopped. I mean, it's like saying the gun is going to be stopped, and if you're on the other side saying the guns, it's like you're going to store beans or you're going to store guns, and if you're storing beans, you're just storing my beans. That's...
Yeah. So it's so fun and tough to be in this jubilation that, like, I wish people could feel the energy that I feel, that I know we feel when we're buzzing, when we're talking to each other, we're looking at each other, and it's good, and there's abundance coming. But the point is that if you are arguing against the gun in this moment, then it's not your beans, it's your people that are about to get fucked up.
Yes.
And this is why I care.
Yeah.
Is that Elizabeth Warren is essentially arguing for the rape and pillage of this country right now. Period. She is, in effect, she doesn't think she's doing this. She may not know she's doing this.
Maybe.
But at the end of the day, that would be the result, because we will have our lunch eaten by somebody else who gets it and implements it. And there is a real danger in that acceleration also. This is at the heart of everything that happened with OpenAI and everything else that's occurred in the AI realm recently, which is that we have a choice to make. And in a game theoretic global environment where many people have that choice, it's sort of out of your hands at that point. And I don't know that we have a choice except to play the game, right? I don't know that it will work as well as it could work unless we meaningfully participate in the game also. This is the thing that I think I realized most through my connection to all of you. I've learned, especially over the last 3 years, in building myself up to be capable of being who I am here today, is that if the best and brightest don't step up, then people who are less best and less bright will. And that's it.
I love that you say that. When I came to your event at the State House for the Blockchain Council, there is a quote on a giant picture there somewhere that says the punishment for men that don't run for government office to affect policy is that they will be governed by lesser men.
Yeah.
And that is a very powerful. When you stand there and look, I think it was like maybe even Abraham Lincoln or
Yeah.
somebody that said
Yeah.
it. Don't quote me. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
just parroting what I read there. I remember being there, and it's on the wall
Well,
somewhere.
I believe it.
And that is a very powerful statement. That if you don't do it, you're going to be led by fill in the blank, whatever your listener.
And you'll find that that isn't actually being led at all, right? And this is why I feel like my life, I try not to speak to the abstract as much as I can. So I'll just say for my life, why I felt so dispirited is that I didn't see anywhere anybody articulating a vision of hope that I believed in. And it's why I think Obama was so captivating, because he literally took the semantic charge of returning hope. Well, you can only do that from a position of absence, right? And it wasn't until I discovered a perspective in the political race that was the 2012 campaign, where Ron Paul ran as a Republican in the Republican Party, as someone who really wasn't a Republican but recognized the game. I recognized that there was this third option that nobody had ever told me about before, which was not making a decision, right? Like it should be this decision or that decision. And nobody ever said, well, we should not be in the middle of this conversation, right? Mm-hmm. That was completely foreign to me as a concept. Well, it's government. Government has to be involved in every decision. What do you mean? This is what we have government for. Well, actually not doing something is still a decision. Yes. And it can be a very valuable decision, right? And so that was where the bit flipped for me internally to say, oh, all of the things that I had looked for as a solution weren't available to me because of a precondition of the system that was giving me these bad solutions that didn't make any sense to me, right? So I was just looking at the world and going, why would I participate in this? There's nothing for me here, right? Another way to say the quote that you said that I think is particularly interesting is that you may not have an interest in politics, but it most certainly has an interest in you.
Amen.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
And so at the end of the day, we do have a choice. And at the level of the individual, not making a choice could be a very powerful choice at scale, right? It's why I think if we introduced a neither option in our voting systems, it would upend everything, right? Guaranteed we'd probably get a majority of people saying neither for most of our recent elections, right? Or at least a plurality. Mm-hmm. Because of that lack of optionality that we've had our whole lives, most of us have really felt like there was nothing for us to do. It was a captured game, it's an insider game, and it is to a lot of degrees. But now, because of the tools that we have available to us, the internet was the first big one, really. And because of that, we saw Donald Trump. Because of that, we're seeing the downstream effects of an unrooting of the globalist order that was propagated through centralized channels. That was the start, and we can do things now we couldn't do 20 years ago.
Bitcoin's 5 years ago.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. Bitcoin is just a continuation of that.
Sure.
And so I do think today, I don't even mean that we have to wait till 2028 for this. I mean, right now, we have a condition where our entire electoral process is about to be reorganized around a new understanding of what's possible. And this isn't to say this is a person I believe in or I think his ideas are good or bad. There's a lot of things I agree and disagree with, but RFK Jr. is running for president as an independent. He's polling at least 20%-ish in multiple states,
Kay
right?
keeps telling me, she's like, you got to vote for RFK. She's like, I'm voting for RFK. You got to vote for him. I'm like, I don't know. We'll see.
Hey, we'll see. We'll see. I think he is a necessary force for us to be able to open the door a little wider to new ideas. That's all I mean to say is that right now, an independent with name recognition, with resources behind him, is going to open the door to a new type of election. If we have 3 legitimate parties for the first time, sure. we haven't seen that in our lives meaningfully, right?
Never.
Ross Perot was an example in 1992. We were too young for that, but the point is, we haven't since. And what that will allow is a new way of thinking about things, a new model of the world. And it may not just be one. There may be multiple people running independent this time. And if we have 4 meaningful candidates running in an election, that changes the percentages. It changes what we think is possible. the tools that are the internet and decentralized protocol of communication, which is Bitcoin. And I think Bitcoin is best understood not as just money or value exchange, but information exchange, generally speaking, right? Because we've decentralized all of that, we now have a new ability to cohere and organize. And because of all of that, we have an ability to come up with new solutions. The problem is, I believe that's a solution that's possible. You believe that's a solution that's possible. Great. I know I've got your vote. That's one. I have thousands upon thousands of people to reach now. You know what I mean? So I don't think that as a mechanism for voting that Bitcoin's going to upend this quickly, but I do think because of the fact that we can now do this in a way that doesn't root us in the existing structures, the optionality occurs now for us to do something different. And because of that, to me, I have hope. I see now that we can affect an aim that we couldn't have affected 10 years ago. We couldn't have affected 5 years ago, like you were saying. But at the end of the day, now we need people that are going to stand up and say the things that are true, right? And I think those have been lacking. I think there are some good examples of people that are getting this industry right? RFK Jr. is one of them who sees Bitcoin as freedom technology. I think that's a great frame for the common person. Vivek Ramaswamy is running on the Republican side, and he's super technical and sharp and gets this industry and gets why fundamentally it's important. To have a politician come out in front and say code is speech and should be protected under the First Amendment is a very important moment for us, right? Saying that the regulatory apparatuses of the government are unconstitutional, and we've already had a Supreme Court case that's decided that, and the implications of that are we reduce the workforce by 90% or however it's possible. It's an interesting moment of possibility, but you can't get there unless people want that. And so for me, it's standing out in front to say what I think is true, finding the others, right? And we've sort of cohered around this idea set of these tools are downstream revolutionary, and maybe we don't understand why or how, we just sort of intuit that that's true. That organization wasn't centrally planned. This is why I keep coming back to, I think there's something very ordered in what's happening, is that how do you make sense of why we all cohered around this idea? What do you make of it that all of us found each other through this tool? And you know what I mean? It's hard to say.
God, man, that's
Right.
It's hard to put any other word on it than that.
Right.
And that was really my turning point, because so many people came into my life that I needed at the right moment, that then looking back,
Yeah.
I saw that like all the air quotes chaos of my younger years made a lot more sense coming to meet you all. When I was in high school or senior year, we did senior government, and for our government class, you had people nominate you to run for whatever position it was, and if you won that spot, you held some fake position, mayor, fire chief, whatever, all the things. It was a lot of different, I don't know, I can't name all the ones we had available, but then you got to go spend a day with those people in your town and like do whatever they did for a day, be them with them for a day. And when we did that, a friend of mine nominated me to be mayor, just like joke. He's like, we're going to make Camp mayor. And like, he stood up and said it real funny. And the teacher wrote my name up on the board. Cameron's running for mayor. And I just laughed like, I was smoking weed. I was sleeping through class. Like, I was like, we're not going to do that. We're definitely not going to do that. And then a couple weeks later, as we were like getting ready to campaign, we had signs in our senior hallway, hilarious signs, just being silly, and like dedicated class times, like, hey, it's time for you guys to work on your campaign slogans, and you're going to really do this, and we're going to vote in these classes. And like, it's silly, but it was structured, and it was time put into it that you had to put in. It wasn't like a voluntary thing. It was part of your class. And then a couple weeks go by, and we're doing maybe a week. And then they decided they took some volunteers for who was going to count votes. And one of my friends ended up counting votes. So guess who won? Guess who won?
Lo and behold.
And then we're talking like 2 days later. I'm like, there's no way I won. We're at lunch, whatever. And he was like, sure you did. And I was
Yeah.
like, no, I didn't. There's no way I won. Like, nobody's voting for me to be mayor. And he was like, well, it doesn't matter who voted for you. It matters who counted the votes. And I was like, what? And he was like, oh, so-and-so got a vote. I'll say his name. Lance Kelly got a vote. That's Lance Kelly got a vote. Oh, well, then Cam got 3 votes. and so once he told me that,
Yeah.
I went to Lance and was like, hey, man, do you want to do the mayor thing?
Yeah.
He was like, yeah, he really wanted to do it. And I was like, oh, it's yours, dog. You do it.
Yeah.
And I didn't tell him that my buddy wrote down all the fake votes for me, but he did.
Yeah.
And that was a very powerful lesson in my life that it really didn't matter who voted for you. It mattered who counted votes.
You did the right thing.
And
nonetheless.
I wonder how stricken our system is with that and if it's even possible. I mean, I feel watching the last couple years that there is some truth to this past election was quote unquote stolen.
Yeah.
And that there is a regime. And I think you brought up a really good point of like since Trump, there's been a new era. The veil has been pierced in some meaningful way. Whether he drained the swamp or not is up for your perspective. But I was kicked off of Twitter for having a Trump thread. It wasn't a pro-Trump thread. It was a documenting Trump's dominance.
Oh, I didn't know that's what it was.
Yeah, it was just a thread of me basically laughing at anyone that was running against Trump. I mean, he was dominating the meme culture and the narrative of like young male voters of like you can't vote against this guy. He's hilarious. If you're voting against this guy, it's because you don't like his attitude, not because you disagree with his policies or what he's doing.
Right.
Or the state of the country. It's like you don't like the man, not where. I mean, stock market was ripping. Everybody's making shit tons of money. Nobody listening to this can think that the economy was better.
war.
You fucking lost your mind if you believe that. Like everybody, even people I know that fucking hate Trump will admit in private, like, oh, my 401k and my stocks were the highest they had ever been. It was insanity. And then, you know, I lost my Twitter account to the regime that ran Twitter. I fought really hard to get it back, and thanks to some hoops we jumped through, we were able to get my account back. And then we come to find out that the entire social media structure had been corrupted from years prior, and it still is. Instagram, Meta, the entire organization, Google. I mean, lots of these companies are against what we would consider free speech, and they are for controlling any and all aspects of the narrative that they can control by any means necessary.
That's right.
Then Elon puts up a bid to buy X, and now here we are today. Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson are having a conversation where Alex is pleading to get his account back. And I know Elon has his own personal feelings about the Sandy Hook stuff, and he didn't like the Sandy Hook stuff that Alex Jones did. And I think there's some validity to personal feelings on it. But at the end of the day, if you're a free speech guy, do you really get a perspective on what is and isn't free speech? You do if you own the fucking platform.
Yes.
Privately. But are we to a place where free speech really has power, or are we still in control of the hidden regime that is like structuring all this? And do other candidates, and this is a very long-winded question to get to, do other candidates even have a fucking shot? I mean, right now the number one podcast in the world that just took over JRE is a Kennedy assassination podcast. There are multiple very popular, including my boy Matt Crumpton's. Shout out Crump, baby. His podcast is crushing, and to me it seems pretty obvious that they just murdered a few Kennedys, and now here we have another one. Is it even feasible to think that this is a real solution, or are they just murking people that they want to murk? And is that part of the game? Is that just where we are? It's war all the way down.
It definitely has been, I think.
Are there too many cameras now?
Right. I was going to make the point about that I don't think Kennedy assassination works today. Right. I think a lot of these games work in an environment of low information fidelity. And as you increase it, I think what we're seeing is a result of our ability to cohere the information, record it, distill it in memory, and then analyze it over time. And it's really hard for us to go back once you see certain things a certain way, right? Like, it's easy to believe that the president was murdered by a lone gunman when that's the narrative that's been given to you and you have no possible ability to look into it otherwise, right? And so controlling the information sources, controlling the narrative from a publication and from a broadcast perspective those are actually really simple to do in 1970s time frame, right?
Easy.
Like, so
Cake.
easy.
Cake.
Yeah, there's
It's
literally
like 8
no
licenses.
right. It's
Broadcast
there's no
licenses.
information
Yeah.
that could possibly get outside of that, right? Except in squirrely pockets where you start writing newsletters and you're desperate.
Everybody gets a newspaper.
Yeah.
So
So I can understand how it's been easy to malign anybody that would try to counter a narrative that forceful and powerful. But there's enough along the way that people hold on to these little nuggets of noticing where lies and mistruths start to occur. And over time, it seems so obvious that it's been done at least a few times so coherently that it's impossible to ignore it as anything other than true. And as soon as you're lied to once, you should reasonably start asking the question, well, what else am I being lied to about, right? The trick is that you have to go to work and you have to pay bills and you're raising a family, and sooner or
Shit to
later it's
do.
just you just don't have time to ever question it. You just go along and you say please and thank you when things are stable, right? And I get why most people don't want to question these things, and I get why me bringing up certain topics sometimes it's difficult for people because they don't, like, why are you bringing this to my attention? This doesn't affect my life. Well, maybe it does, and maybe it does in a way you're not aware of. Maybe it has your whole life in ways you're not aware of. And I think also what happens is when it occurs where your reality is shattered, right? When you go from that, everything is dandy to, oh my God, they've been doing what? I don't think it's reasonable to say that everybody handles that well, right? I think
Sure.
that breaks some people, and I
Sure.
think some people just choose to keep ignoring it, and I think some people can't handle it. If you can handle it, well, great. You're in the minority, and you're speaking a very dangerous truth and attempting to speak it in earnest. Maybe they just kill you too, right? So it seems pretty real to me that we live in a very manufactured world in ways that we couldn't comprehend because
Sure.
that just seems to be an extrapolation of that effect over time. Can we do anything about it, right? Is there anything we could possibly, is it just a controlled structure? Well, I don't know. I always operate as if it is the case because I think to not believe that's the case is the despair that they're probably
Yes.
trying to drive in people. I think that whatever they exists can't compete with the human spirit fully articulated. I think it's the most powerful thing that we have at our disposal, and I think we can't harness it because it's been taught out of us, diminished. We've been dispirited as people. And so the demoralization that occurs is to prevent us from overcoming those things that we're diminished by, because I think that we can. It doesn't feel like a rigged game where there's no hope except just pure despair and being under the thumb of some entity, right? To me, it's if we realize our true human nature and if we articulate that in this world effectively, I do believe that we can overcome these evils that exist. But to do so is to do the work within yourself. It's to be paying attention to the things that are going wrong. And it's honestly to be willing to sacrifice yourself for the larger goal, right? This, at the end of the day, if you just say, well, I'm just going to, do what's best for my family, I'm going to keep my head down and I'm not going to cause any trouble. Well, great. It's a reasonable decision. I totally understand it. But if everybody does that, then we're just slaves, right? So it feels really important to me that we stand up, but I only do it because I think that it could have a potential outcome. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe we're just in this simulated reality to learn a lesson that there's nothing we can do about it, and maybe it just all is what it is. I don't know. But, for me right now, it does feel like if they were to do what they did to Kennedy now, we would notice it. It would reveal itself. That's why I don't think Trump drained the swamp.
Sure.
But I think he revealed it. I don't think most people were really aware of the depths to which it could really grab on to something and control it. I think we're still seeing that, right?
Yeah, still watching the pool.
They're making a martyr of him, and so I wonder too, like, is that purposeful? Is there some demagoguery that's planned in a way that we couldn't predict? That there are some accounts that are on Twitter that I think are going on Tim Pool's podcast, that are taking the narrative that this is still a manufactured game at a level we don't
Can't
comprehend, right?
Yeah.
And that all of it is just working towards some aim that is unstoppable, right? And at the end of the day, you can go to the root of any prophecy or mythical story or anything like that talks about end times, and it will talk about things that look like inevitabilities, and it will talk like things that look like false light and antichrist and whatever these things are. But at the end of the day, it all leads to the same thing, as far as I can tell. So maybe nothing we do matters. I don't know, but that doesn't seem like a very fulfilling way to live my life.
No, it's not.
At all, right? But I do articulate everything I do under the belief, and I do have faith in that belief, right? I can't prove it, that we actually have an ability to affect things in this world, and I think we can win this.
Same.
I don't know what it looks
do
like,
too.
but
Part of that thread that I had posts, tweets at the time is what they were called. They were called tweets.
They still are,
Back in
as far
history.
as I'm
No,
concerned.
they're not. No, they're not. Tweets are the regime term. But I had posts that said, if you don't see that President Trump could be the last president of these United States of America, you are very confused about what is going on and the energy that's at play here.
Yeah.
And I still believe that. I still believe
Agree.
it would be very difficult under a legitimate system to undermine the energy that he was delivering on a daily basis to interviewers.
Yeah.
I mean, he literally just look at journalists and be like, "You're a fucking idiot. Get out of here. I'm not talking to you ever again. You're done." And it's like, "But the right to press. I have a badge. My company sent me here." And he's like, "Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
You're not, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't talk to you anymore."
They asked him about oil prices one time. He said, "What's the price of oil?" And they didn't know. He's like, "You didn't know? Why are you asking the question then if you don't know?"
And so, like, I mean, I saw it as this guy was really changing the game in a way that we couldn't comprehend because he had been at the parties.
Yes.
And he knew the people that he was talking to in a way that we had never seen them. He had seen them in lights that we had never seen them. They're all so polished and well presented, but he had probably seen them, really partying and letting loose. And that energy feels like the same energy. Is it Argentina that just elected the new president?
Milei. Yeah.
And it seems like that guy, I mean, people were comparing him to Trump, and they're like, some people were saying it in a bad light, other people were saying it in like, that he is going to revolutionize what was going on. And obviously it wasn't a great circumstance for a majority of the citizens there. So do you feel that if somebody were going to be killed, assassinated today, that would be a place that it would happen, and him not having that happen to him there is a good sign that maybe somebody like Kennedy could come in and really change our system, or even Trump coming in and really changing the system? And what do you think about that? What's his name? You said Milei?
Milei. Yeah, Javier Milei.
How do you feel about him in general? And like, I don't know anything about it. And I'm just like surface level, know who he is.
Right.
Know the energy. I like watched a video of him after he won, and he was like, "Ministry of Education, fucking see ya." Yeah. Ministry of Gender, see ya.
Yeah. It's an interesting circumstance where you have a libertarian-esque Austrian economics, like well-educated economics perspective, run for government against the literal, essentially like central banking apparatus, right? That has been responsible for the monetary condition of that country for some time. And this guy is running on a platform of, I am going to get rid of the central bank in Argentina.
Yeah.
All right. So you want to talk about the easiest way to get killed? It'd be to
That's
say
it.
something
That's
like that. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's
yeah.
right.
So it seems like a death sentence.
So he made it through. That's interesting, right? And then, some interesting things happen right after the election where he's like meeting with Bill Clinton and some other people, and you're just like, all right, well, what are you talking to these people for? But it's like always a death spell to get your picture taken next to Bill Clinton. It seems like, just ask SBF. But he campaigned and is basically in power now from a non-negotiable perspective of, I am getting rid of the Central Bank of Argentina. We're going to dollarize. So the we're going to dollarize part of it, I think, probably gives him some defensibility, right? Because again, if there's a regime, it's the global dollar regime that exists, right? And so just like you're seeing with interesting things playing out in Colombia and Venezuela right now, like I don't know if you're paying attention to the fact that Venezuela has essentially usurped half of the neighboring country and basically gathered all of their offshore oil rights as a result. So Guyana, which was where is it Jim Jones basically holed up basically in the cult back in the day and had everybody drinking the Kool-Aid.
Okay.
Basically, it's a South American country that neighbors Venezuela, but essentially they have found a massive offshore oil discovery, and Exxon was exploring it. The Venezuelan military basically boarded Exxon ships. They've basically captured half of the territory of the onshore country so that they can capture the territorial rights of the offshore waters. And anyway, all of that exists under a global regime of some very tricky oil decisions and cooperations that occur, right? So Venezuela was a tricky business until we needed oil, and then all of a sudden decisions are being made that get very interesting because at the end of the day, the spice must flow, right? So geopolitically, South America is very interesting for a lot of reasons. It has been for many decades. When you get somebody like Milei who actually wins an election, right? And it's not just that he won an election, but he was maligned in the same way that Trump has been maligned and others, which is that not just that this is a person that shouldn't win the election, but that this is a crazy person that is dangerous, right? Right. And so they had a primary where he won and went to a runoff, and in between then and now, they basically tried to paint him as a schizophrenic, crazy person, right? And he captured 60% of the vote. I mean, it's a meaningful outcome that he won there. And
I mean, the streets were cheering.
that's right. That's right. And they're cheering because they're so despondent and because they've been so devastated by the monetary policy that they're looking for any solution. And so the solution right now is not Bitcoin. The solution is, can this person stay alive long enough to marshal the coordination of the local and regional governments of this country to even begin to be able to cohere an outcome that looks like getting rid of the central bank? You can't just do that, right?
Right.
We're so entrenched that it must start with like an almost religious like figure to even get people to rally around a singular idea. And I think this is the flaw with modern politics, is that it requires cult of personality, right? In order to even get to a possibility of better governance, we have to buy into a cult of ideology, and that feels like a problem to me, right?
Always, though. I mean,
but
that's
it is, yeah.
What there's always been.
It's the nature of humans, and maybe we can't unroot that from ourselves. But at the end of the day, if that's what it requires, we're probably in trouble, right? Because that only goes so far, and then at the end of the day, once that person wins, they're within a system that is working against them at all times.
Yes,
I think that's just what we saw with Trump. Honestly, if I'm just taking a surface level explanation of it, is this: that he won unexpectedly and he was stifled at every turn by entrenched interests, right? So how could you possibly get anything done under that circumstance? And so this isn't something we can solve right away, but I think it's why somebody like Vivek making the argument that simply slashing the bureaucratic state is a good start, right? Which is that U.S. EPA versus the state of West Virginia is a Supreme Court case that I think is going to be really relevant. This is something Vivek brought up. But basically, it said that the U.S. EPA was acting unconstitutionally in trying to govern certain emissions requirements that the state of West Virginia and its government wanted to implement within the state. Basically, the Supreme Court said, yeah, that's right. Like, this is regulatory overreach. And these regulatory agencies, which are not voted on, we don't vote those people in, we don't vote on their rule sets, basically are governing most of the country at this point, right? So in order to unroot it, you've got to unroot those regulatory bodies, and often that just looks like getting rid of the people that work there, right? And the government is not a workforce development program, and it exists to serve certain functions, and we should be cutting it back to that point to even get to it. But in order to get to a point where you can cut back, you have to survive, right? And step one to survive is have enough resources at your disposal that you're not dependent on taking somebody else's money and then being beholden to them, right? So how many people reasonably could ever run from that position of power, right?
Yeah.
Like not many. And if you did have that resource, is that really what you want to spend your life doing? You know what I mean? Like you have to give up a lot.
Everything.
Everything.
You have to dedicate really all of your time for a man like Malay.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just, as you were talking there, I was hearing you and thinking about this man has to go to sleep.
Right.
And how are you going to sleep feeling super comfy? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
are you getting good rest, sir?
Do you trust your security guards?
All of it.
Every single one.
Every single one. Do you
Yep.
trust? And then, you take it even go beyond conspiratorial, but like, are you getting food delivered?
Right.
Who's cooking the food?
Seriously.
Who's tasting the food? It'd be very draining.
It's wild, actually, when you think about what it takes to even keep a system like this afloat. Like I was looking at, I think it was Iran took a flight into maybe Russia or China recently, but I just watched like a big Boeing jet that was flown by a nation state and then all of these armed security apparatuses. And how many planes did it take to fly in before that just to be ready for this head of state? And so, yeah, like those are also resources that get wasted when we entrench the system like we do, right? Like what I'm meaning to say is that in effect, we're wasting all of this time and energy trying to get back to a place where we can better cohere that energy, right? So the waste is simply dealing with the bureaucratic apparatus as it is, and then spending your whole life or your time trying to get within it to try to change it in any meaningful sense, and you can't. And so again, most people will just look at that from the outside as it exists and go,
No,
nah,
thanks.
not for me, not for my family. I'm not putting people I care about at risk, right? Because at the end of the day, what we haven't really articulated is that it isn't actually just about you. It is that I don't scare you most by saying I'm going to kill you. I'm scaring you most by saying I'm going to kill your friends,
Yeah,
kill your
or
family.
family.
Yeah, exactly.
So Bill went to my buddy Billy Mays on the last episode, 2 episodes ago, episode 6. You guys should listen to it.
Shout out to Billy Mays.
Love Bill. Hi, Bill. Him and his partner were recently invited to President Carter's wife's funeral.
Really?
She's his wife, or not wife, partner, Katie. Katie Hawkins. Gar is on the board. I think her name's Jacqueline. I'm sorry if I'm getting it wrong, but Mrs. Carter's board in Atlanta for her foundation, charitable work and things. And she's been there for years, and they got invited.
Wow.
As invitees, they had to be there a certain amount of time early because the Obamas and the Bidens and other high-profile figures are also joining the event. How many presidents are alive today in the United States? I don't know the answer. I'm just
4.
They all get Secret Service their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine the secrets that any of these men hold, or the information that any of these men hold, that is so valuable that you have to dedicate full time, 100% of the time, Secret Service to them and probably their immediate family to make sure that nobody's in danger of those secrets or information having to be exposed or shared.
Right.
And you think about that, of how much effort just goes into going to a funeral by these high-profile figures. I can't imagine what it's like when you're trying to overthrow something that's as big as a central bank. I mean, it seems incomprehensible to say, and it seems like a literal death. It's how I feel like it's a death sentence. And
That's right.
To really take that on, you have to be a madman. You know, like at some level, they're saying, this guy's fucking crazy. You are right. You are correct.
Absolutely.
This man is
Couldn't
definitely
be done without it.
crazy. Yeah. I mean, he's crazy in one
Yeah.
sense or the other. And the fact that he's willing to do it says a lot about where they currently are. And that's where I would say a line gets drawn of, is it possible for us to change the regime here? And would we want it changed? And, it feels like the United States is and from my perspective, it's a amazing place to live. I love it. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you, recording this. I'm just going to post this to the fucking internet.
It's heaven.
Anybody can listen to
How
it.
could we complain
Yeah,
ever,
I
right?
don't understand. And how lucky are we?
Right.
But also, I have a house full of guns and a job and an income and all these rights that everybody, all of my neighbors, most of my neighbors agree
Yeah.
that I should have as a sane human being.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know what the right answer is, but it feels like this is pretty close to the way I would want things. I can't really imagine them to be better. And that's, you know, you said heaven. That's my argument to people when I say like, this is heaven. And they're like, this isn't heaven. Off my first instinct is to say, well, what is heaven like? And they'd be like, no wants, no nothing. But then quickly I can get them to a place of very, very confused of, well, do you have anybody here that you don't like? And they'll be like, of course, that's not my heaven.
Yeah.
And I'd be, hey, do you like anybody that likes that person? Because would you agree to be in heaven with this person that you really like that says, I'm not going to heaven unless this person is also with me, and you just happen to not like that other person? Are you going to agree to still go to heaven? And you're going to probably say, fuck. You're right. and it very quickly it becomes I don't like that person, I don't want them to be here, but I'm willing to make an agreement as long as X person is here with me, and I wouldn't give up X person in heaven, even if it meant Y person has to be there with me. And it feels like the United States is doing a pretty amazing job at allowing people to live what I consider a heavenly existence.
Yeah.
And I say what you will about the United States, but I'm not trying to fucking hear it really. I like it here. And like, I'm glad that Elizabeth Warren can say the dumb shit and I can look at her and be like, what an idiot.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, fine. If idiots want to vote for somebody like that, that tells me a lot about the person. And I don't need to judge Elizabeth. I'll judge the people that are putting her in power. And it's like, well, if you're telling me that Elizabeth Warren is your champion, we're not hanging out very long. I'm gonna be out of this conversation pretty quickly. Sure. So I don't feel like things need to change drastically, but I do look at somebody like RFK and think he does say some things that are very meaningful and I feel could have a big impact on America. And in what way, I don't know. And that's a small, you said like mitigating the cause and effect of like, we need to make sure that, you said a power station comes on, we need to make sure that it doesn't fuck up everything else. I mean, that's really what a power change represents perfectly. That is a real analogy of a presidential change is bringing a new power structure on board that we need to make sure the system can actually handle. Yeah. And without causing absolute chaos. It's the exact same thing.
That's right.
How do you do that in today's world where information travels so quickly? Of the right podcasts like this, you post it to the internet. I mean, how powerful would a man like Hitler have been with a podcast? You know, I mean,
yeah. Well, unknowable, but you could imagine that the reach potential of information dissemination today is, I would say, maybe 90%. It's not 100%, but I think it can reach most of the world at some point, right? And there's time dilation that occurs there. So what does it mean for us to be able to do that now when we couldn't before, right? What are the implications of that? When you look at just people in space, for instance, right? If we're just abstracting to the human energy of people, and then we look at immigration laws globally, right? And if you were to just imagine a visualization of all human traffic over the world over a certain period of time, right? Well, that's energy, and those are people moving in space and time. And our governance structure, for instance, right now is trying to figure out how to deal with a massive influx of energy of a bunch of people coming over, and not all of that energy is known energy, right? Some of it's unstable, some of it's chaotic, and that has a real consequence. We just saw it in Detroit, where a South American gang, using sophisticated techniques, pilfered a significant amount of high-income homes in Detroit. This is something that
not hip to this.
No, it just happened today. Look it up. It's really interesting. So you're going to start to see more stories about people using signal jammers
Yep.
and Wi-Fi jammers and things
Sure.
like that. We see this in South Africa right now where things have already broken down. And so what you're going to get are organized effects, right? That's just energy. We're looking at energy playing itself out. And the perversion, the corruption that already occurred is that our government, which was in charge of keeping the frequency stable, implemented policies that specifically unstabilized the frequency. Right, that's what they're doing right now, and so we're in a load shedding moment here where we can't really handle the chaos, and we're at a critical, pivotal point where if we don't do things correctly, we're going to end up with blackouts. Right, and blackouts in this example looks like people's homes getting looted, destabilization of communities, et cetera. And it feels like it's kind of too late for that in many respects. And so I think a lot of the work to be done moving forward is how do we protect and defend certain jurisdictions, because we're not going to be able to protect all of them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that is due to decisions that have already been made. And so for me, when I look at like the energy that's used to protect all of these high profile people and everything like that, like these are the people that sold us out. And then we're going to use all of our resources to protect them in the case of a breakdown of things. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's a decision we would make if we were fully informed, right? So now that we are more fully informed than we've ever been, and increasingly so, and that won't stop. Like, this is the thing about the internet, is that its inevitability won't stop. And people are waking up, and maybe...
I can't believe people use Meta products. I cannot fucking
Sure.
believe a human being in 2023 is like, I like Instagram and Facebook. I'm
Yeah.
like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
It's habits, it's persuasion, it's... these are tools
Rainbow Land.
Yeah, it's intentionally demoralizing, right? It's entrapping people in the demoralization regime. Third-party doctrine is the way that they got around these tools being, useful gardens for our information, right? So the whole the government can't illegally search or seize your property, right? Like, that made sense until third-party doctrine came around and said anytime you give up information to a third party willingly, it's no longer privileged information, right?
Sure.
So they used that as a basis to capture all information, because any information you put in that phone, you gave to your phone carrier.
Yeah.
So you have no privacy.
Sure.
That's everything this thing is recording or capturing,
Right.
which is everything.
Yeah, it's recording right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So through that logic, basically, now we have no privacy. Now,
Sure.
and the government says, well, it's not unconstitutional because it's this third party that's doing it, and we're just compelling that third party through other legal means, right? So they got around it, right? So is the Constitution worth anything at that point? Well, no, not if people aren't willing to defend it, right? So this is where, again, hearts and minds. This will only ever work if people want it to and they're willing to defend it. Otherwise, we'll get what we get, and it's not going to be great, right? So, to me right now, attention is the most valuable thing that we have. I think what Elon did, and there's some discussion to be had about Elon, but what he did instantiating the public square that is Twitter, that is X, and making it so that we're able to actually talk about things and not be prevented. Right? We were very much prevented from talking about things.
Prevented from even
Censored.
discussing.
That's right.
Period.
From
Yes.
even saying certain words.
Yes.
Right? Like even just putting the word vaccine in a nonsensical tweet got that tweet banned, right? So we existed under that regime, and now that we've had this open access of speech, I do believe that we're seeing how powerful it actually is. Like, I do believe that our power is derived from our ability to affect the world through articulation, and that's physical. We pick up things, we move them around, we build, but it's through sound mostly. Sound is the way that we're cohering most of the things in the world today, and this is, again, why I learned so much from you along the way here, because you taught me how to think about the ways in which words and sounds and syllables have actual literal power, and utilizing them can empower, but it can disempower too, right? So I think that that's just kind of the moment we're in with a meta product type solution with these walled gardens. Is we gave up all of our power to those walled gardens. Anytime I put my photo on Instagram, anytime I put my text on Twitter, It was theirs, and it was theirs to use, right? The reversal of that means, I think, we bring that back into ourselves completely, and then we get to better choose how we delineate that energy and how we harness it. That, to me, is what they are afraid of, is that in doing that, we're going to be able to organize in ways we've never done before, and not for nefarious purposes, but for the upliftment of our species.
Yes. Yeah.
And I do believe that there are forces on this planet that would like to prevent that, and that's
Same.
fundamental.
So do you think this election is a pivotal election for us? Do you think every election has been pivotal in some meaningful
Probably.
way?
I think it feels trite to say that every election is going to be the most important election, but it does feel that way, right?
Yeah.
I genuinely do think
It does seem like the next
that
4 years are fucking
yeah.
important 4 years. It feels like Bitcoin, AI,
Yeah.
the internet, freedom of speech, information dissemination
Yes.
is like pivotal.
Yeah.
We're at a time where everything is at a critical mass.
Right. And I think we said that about 2020. I think we said that about 2016. I think that those that were looking for Trump to be elected in 2020 and those that think maybe there was some weirdness in the middle there, I'm definitely one of them,
Same.
looked at it as if we don't get this right, things are going to happen in the intervening years that we can't undo. It's kind of the nature of criticality, is that, you know, there are certain things that
Time
can
is
be,
now.
like if you know, 5 million illegal immigrants pour into the country over the course of a single year, you can't undo that afterwards, right? And this is sort of the downstream effect of what we're seeing. And so, because of that, and because of certain measures that are going to be not only voted on, but probably decided in the public sphere over the next 4 years, things like, you know, property rights, things like, you know, jurisprudence on the Supreme Court. Like, should we keep the Supreme Court as is? Should we expand it? Should Puerto Rico become a state and add 2 Democrat senators to the balance of the Senate, right? Like, all of those things will be affected if they can be, right? This is the nature of power. And so we're in a pivotal choice of, we either allow the regime apparatus to entrench itself fully, or we allow for another 4-year period of some optionality to maybe prevent that from coming to fruition. And again, this is only if we have a choice. But I do believe not only is the presidential election important, but the Senate races that are occurring to pivot the Senate around it will be important too. That's why I think that the Ohio Senate race is so important. That's why we're spending a lot of time and energy, money, attention otherwise, on Sherrod Brown's reelection campaign in Ohio right now. He is running against 3 primary opponents that are fairly formidable in and of themselves, but he's a 40-year incumbent.
40 years.
He's been in for a while. I think it's been that long. I'm not sure, but too long, and too long given the moment we're in, and too long for us to wait another period of time to try to prevent things from happening or bring things to fruition. And so it really, the moment is now, and this is what we started with, is it feels really meaningful to be in this moment now, participating, and I'm only participating to a certain degree. There are many of us that are doing this, but we will lose the moment if we don't take advantage of it right now. And we have to do this right now. And so, of course, right now, then, this coming year is going to be the most important election we've ever encountered. And like you said about Trump potentially being the last president, good, bad, or otherwise, I still think that that's possible.
I do too.
Like, I genuinely believe that
Anybody
we
who
can
thinks
see
he
that
lost
outcome.
energy, he has gained energy. I mean,
there's
it's
no question.
undeniable. He has gained. I know people that voted against Trump that hated, despised him.
Yeah.
But over the last 4 years, they were like, what the fuck was I thinking?
Right.
And Trump, I have to vote for Trump the next election. And if he's on the election ballot, he is absolutely getting my vote. And I'm talking 60 and 70-year-old women.
Yeah.
That were absolutely, I'll never vote for him. What a scumbag, pig, piece of shit.
Right.
I mean, all the terms that you would think that any female especially
Yes.
would throw at the man, Donald Trump, have completely changed face. And they're like, I was wrong.
These are luxuries, these beliefs.
Man.
When you sit atop an abundance, you get to question niche cultural topics and personality. When shit gets real, right? And this is like, we're in this moment where shit is real. All of that goes away. all of it. And then you're just about how can I protect myself and my family. And it seems so obvious to us that we're being sold out by a certain class of people that are in charge, that are the in group. And whether or not you want to say that the man with the golden tower and the golden toilets is the guy that's on the outside of it at the end of the day, right? There's no question that the regime fought him tooth and nail, and that must be for a reason, right? And the reason is they knew that they couldn't control it like they have been. Unfortunately, it often takes people getting hurt for them to realize that something is the way that it is, right? And so to me, the last election cycle and Biden winning and all of the things that happened, it was a further revelation of what's real. It opened more eyes. It was unfortunate. It was really unpleasant. It was really tough to look at the statistical circumstances and just recognize there was obviously something nefarious going on here. Maybe we can't place it, but
I mean, the man can't speak. He can't walk himself around.
yeah,
I mean, like
historical levels of voting that are statistically aberrant in certain bellwether counties.
It's just
that
ridiculous. The whole thing is just a clown
that's right.
show.
But if you play a game a certain way and you capture enough communicative territory, you can offer a different story. And then I genuinely feel like we've been under a regime of gaslighting and disinformation for so long that to go outside of that is to automatically be aligned as somebody goofy, as somebody that doesn't know what's real, right? Like, and it's really easy when you're inside that mentality to feel secure in that enough to point fingers at others, right? And so I face this every day in my life, but I think it's so intuitively obvious that you can only be ignoring it to not get it at this point.
I'll tell you, the final straw for some people in my life was the United States military turning over dishonorable discharges for people that left because they didn't get the vaccine.
Right.
And that change of heart by the military to say, no, we will reinstate your discharge and you will be reinstated, your compensation packages and things like that, is a massive event to many people that was not widely televised, for
Of course not.
lack of a better term. The revolution will not be televised.
Right.
And that is a very meaningful point in the vaccine conversation that is around COVID. And who knows what's next or what the next turning point is, but it feels like the narrative of truth and information has shifted in some meaningful way. I want to ask you, you mentioned the Sherrod Brown. Who's running against him, and what are you looking at in the moment because I don't know anything about that. Do you have any information you could share on like what the landscape is there and who's good and who's not?
Yeah, we have a Republican primary that's going on right now to pick a candidate to run against him next year. There are three candidates. One is a Republican leader within our state house right now, Matt Dolan. His family owns the Indians, or did at least, so he's pretty well connected and has been in politics for a while. The second one is a guy named Frank LaRose, who is our current Secretary of State. So he runs all the voting and things like that within the state of Ohio, and he's sort of part of the governor's camp in that way, part of the executive branch. The third one is a businessman named Bernie Moreno. And Bernie, never been in politics, basically ran auto dealerships. He built a blockchain business in 2018, 2019. So he's not only hip to it, but the only politician I've ever talked to that gets this completely. So imagine we have somebody like that running for Senate right now. It's pretty incredible. We anticipate that he will get the Trump endorsement at some point, and I think that puts him in the lead.
Sure,
we'll see. We'll see how things play out in terms of the inter-party primary, but that will be voted on in March, and then basically from there it's a pure race in the Senate, and we think this will be probably the pivot seat in terms of RD for the Senate, and it's likely to be, just given the way it's shaking out, somebody who's pretty antagonistic to crypto, to Bitcoin, and somebody who's very pro, right? So not only is it pivotal in terms of the output of the governance of the government in the Senate itself, but it's pivotal in terms of the fact that Bitcoin will be a central topic in the race itself, right? So it isn't just that he gets it or they get it. It's that it is fundamentally at the center of the debate right now, because it isn't just about number go up. It isn't just about the energy. It's about philosophical underpinnings of what we think is valuable in a free society. And so Bitcoin as freedom technology is going to ring true in the current moment. And so it's going to be the Elizabeth Warrens going against that. And I think it's obvious. It's obvious if Elizabeth Warren is using Jamie Dimon as her key witness to talk against this, that's not really what's up.
Right.
And the only people fooled by that are donors to Elizabeth Warren and people who work for Jamie Dimon.
Sure.
Because their paycheck's signed by the man, right? So at the end of the day, that's a good thing. I welcome all of this because it's further revelation. Let people see what you really think. And if we're really going to argue that...
Just give them enough rope. Give them the microphone.
100, please, say more, right? And I'm no longer fearful of that, right? But it's kind of that moment where we need to do everything we can to utilize the moment to get this in front of as many people as possible. And so I'm very thankful that, at least within the current moment, like I've been able to develop a good relationship with Bernie Moreno, and he definitely gets the topic, and we talk a lot about blockchain and Bitcoin and things like that. And if he were to win, for instance, and actually run against Sherrod, then we have 6-7 months of meaningful hammering the federal politic and the political landscape with Bitcoin, with blockchain, with digital technology, right? I don't think we can miss out on that opportunity. I do think that that's going to take some serious dedication for people to put in the work to just be frustrated a lot because, I've been working with people to try to get better ideas in front of Sherrod and his team for the last, 6-9 months or so, and they just don't want to hear it, right? Like they're not meeting the moment,
40 years.
Yeah, and I think in that way, you outsource your decision making, right? And I just think, we don't have people in there that are individually capable of dealing with the litany of issues they're faced with. And so they rely on staff, they rely on outside opinion, they rely on their leadership. It's pretty clear that Elizabeth Warren negotiated a position to basically foster banking regulation based on the primary. And when she conceded,
really cranked it.
When she conceded to Biden, the deal was she would get to deal with banking policy, right? And so here we are. And so this election pivotally is around that idea and whether or not we continue to give those people their power to do what they're trying to do, or if we put in a stopgap measure to try and prevent it while we continue to build, while we continue to grow adoption.
My king, it has been lovely talking to you today. You got anything else you want to tell the people?
Show up. This thing I'm telling people all the time. Just be where you are, say what you think is true, and if you do it with a smile on your face, there's only so much they can do to hurt you. So,
amen, baby. I'd love to have you back here soon. I'm trying to get 10 in this year.
Yeah.
This is 8, and I got one. I'm gonna try to get Bill on.
Good.
And then I'm gonna try to do a group.
Yeah.
And I would love to have you a part of that if you're up for it. So I'll have you back soon.
Great.
And talk to more people with more minds in the room and a wider range of subjects.
Can't wait.
My king, I love talking to you so much. I could really talk to you for hours and hours.
We got
hours.
life to deal with.
I got a baby upstairs now. I got a whole different thing, but I really had a good time with you today.
Thank you for having
Drank
me.
a couple beers, and always a pleasure to hear your thoughts and where you're at in life. You're an inspiring person, and I really appreciate your time. I love you very much. Thanks for joining us.
It's been fun to do it with you, Kim. Wait till next time.
Amen, baby. Talk to y'all.